Chapter 261, I Do. The 17th Princess of Qinas was stunningly beautiful. Even though the King of Qinas had over a dozen beautiful wives to help dilute his unfortunate appearance, not every prince or princess ended up inheriting the better parts of the royal gene pool. But the 17th princess was one of the lucky ones. She looked almost identical to her birth mother. Thanks to that, she effortlessly snatched the title of the most beautiful royal from her second eldest sister. As a princess, beauty was her greatest asset, aside from power and status, of course. So unlike her sisters who had long been married off for political alliances, she had waited patiently for the perfect opportunity. In her view, she was not only beautiful and clever, but also poised to inherit a fortune that would be astronomical by common standards. Naturally, her future husband could never be just another ordinary man. To her, anyone who wasn't a king or grand duke was beneath consideration. But she never expected that the marriage she had dreamed of for so long would end up as a political compromise. Though her betrothed was a descendant of the Grand Duchess of the Kemaduchi, he was still a commoner with little chance of inheriting the Kemaduchi. She couldn't understand it, sure. Her brother Aruba had failed to advance to second-rank wizard, but it wasn't like all hope was lost. Why would they so quickly bow their heads to Kemaduchi? Disappointed and bitter, the 17th princess embarked on her journey of marriage with lavish extravagance. To make herself feel better, she even went so far as to steal the court musician recently favored by the first queen, not her biological mother, dragging him along on the journey. What she hadn't expected was to fall head over heels. From that moment on, the flirtatious and indulgent princess could no longer look at anyone else. All she wanted to do was gaze at Victor, day after day. "Victor, your name is so lovely." At that moment, the 17th princess rested her graceful chin in her hand, staring dreamily at the man before her. "Just an ordinary name," Victor replied disinterestedly, glancing down to idly pluck a few strings on his harp, producing disjointed, tuneless notes. Even those scattered tones were enough to bring a smile of infatuation to the princess's lips. "The journey's been tiring, I know, but don't worry, we're almost at Borderfall City. Once we arrive, you'll stay in my room. If anyone dares show you the slightest disrespect, I'll raze Borderfall City to the ground." "Is that so? We're nearly there," Victor murmured with a trace of melancholy. Strands of silver hair fell across his cheek, making him look as fragile as a snow-white rabbit. "Are you upset?" The 17th princess was mesmerized. Forgetting the boundaries she had promised to respect, she stepped forward on impulse. She reached out, wanting to brush those silver strands aside, or better yet, twirl them gently between her fingers. But just a few centimeters from touching him, Victor suddenly turned and shot her a cold, disgusted glare. "Don't touch me." The princess jumped in surprise and took a step back. Still, she wasn't angry. She simply assumed Victor was in a bad mood. But why is Victor upset? Ah, right. Arriving at Borderfall City means the wedding is getting closer. He must be heartbroken. Suddenly, the 17th princess no longer thought reaching Borderfall City was a good thing. She frowned, then yanked open the curtain of the carriage window and called to the maid walking alongside. "Tell the Knight Commander, we're not going to Borderfall City." The maid froze on the spot at the princess's declaration. But she didn't dare make her repeat it. She ran off at once to deliver the message to the Knight Commander. The Knight Commander, still strong despite being over 50, was stunned when he heard. He hurried over to try to talk her out of it. But the willful princess paid no heed to the welcoming committee awaiting them in Borderfall City. She insisted on stopping at another town instead. The Knight Commander knew better than to argue directly with her, so he summoned a local attendant and quietly asked, "Are there any towns nearby?" The attendant thought for a moment, then replied respectfully, There are two sizable ones nearby. The closest is Goat Ridge Town, and the other is Grind Sale Town, which is a bit farther. Which one is closer to Borderfall City? That would be Grind Sale Town. With fast horses, it's just half a day from Borderfall. How's the atmosphere there? Grind Sale is closer to Borderfall, but it's under the protection of a wizard tower. The town is effectively governed by two first-rank wandering wizard. The knight commander tensed at the mention of a wizard tower, but relaxed again at the clarification. Just two first-rank apprentices. That's fine. We've brought along a third-rank apprentice ourselves, nothing to worry about. We'll head for Grind Sale Town and send two riders ahead to Borderfall City with a message. If the Kema Duchy sends troops to fetch the bride, it won't be my fault for not delivering her. Thus, at the whim of one capricious princess, the entire marriage escort team veered slightly off course and made their way toward a remote border town barely anyone had heard of. Evening was approaching, but thankfully, they were already close to Grind Sale Town. By the time the rooftops of the town came into view, the sun had sunk to the horizon, leaving only a smear of red. Just as the princess was trying her best to win Victor's favor, a maid outside the carriage cried out in alarm. The mood she had been trying to cultivate was abruptly ruined. The princess gritted her teeth. What is it? Princess, outside the town there are graves, lots of them, and some of them. What? The 17th princess leaned toward the window and looked outside. She saw several mounds of earth, graves, some of which had been dug up, leaving bloody remains in the open. She frowned slightly at the grisly scene. Then she glanced at Victor and quickly pressed a hand to her forehead. Oh my, how frightening! Who would do something so awful, digging up graves like that? Victor hadn't cared about the commotion until he heard about the dug-up graves. Suddenly, he gripped his harp and sprang to the carriage door, startling everyone. "Ha, interesting," he muttered, though his face was anything but amused. "Victor, don't be afraid, let's leave. We can go to another town." Silence. Victor raised his right hand sharply. Before the carriage had even fully stopped, he leapt down with practiced grace and strode toward the field where the graves lay in neat rows. He studied the open graves carefully. He even sniffed the air without the slightest hesitation. And then, for the first time in days, he smiled. Victor mouthed two silent words. When he returned to the princess's carriage, he was all smiles, his step light. For the first time since they had met, the 17th princess saw Victor smile like this. She was utterly entranced. Princess, in country towns like this, it's normal to have burial sites outside the walls. The sun is setting. We should get into town. He stepped gracefully back into the carriage, ignoring the confused and wary glances of the others, and closed the door firmly behind him. "You're not angry?" the thoroughly trained princess asked nervously. "Of course not. In fact, I'm thrilled." He was. Even the tone of his voice curled upward at the end. For once, he sat within a meter of the princess. A ray of sunset light fell across his face, warming his fair skin with a golden hue. The 17th princess was once again bewitched. "Victor, you're so beautiful. If I had met you sooner, I wouldn't have touched anyone else." In the past, Victor would have ignored such flattery. But today, he smiled at her and turned his gaze out the window toward the hills. The sun was nearly gone, only a faint red glow lingering at the edge of the sky. But because of that contrast against the darkening blue, it looked even redder, like fresh blood. Have you ever heard the phrase, "the setting sun is like blood"? Isn't it beautiful? Victor said softly. Not as beautiful as you. The 17th princess had no interest in the scenery. Victor was finally being kind to her. She wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Tonight, she would have him completely. "I don't like the setting sun is like blood. I prefer the setting sun drips blood." Victor's smile deepened. He suddenly turned to her and said, "Your Highness, shall we take our relationship to the next level tonight?" The 17th princess was stunned. Victor was thinking the exact same thing as she was. "Really? Do you want to?" he asked. I do," the princess answered without a shred of hesitation. Victor's voice lowered into a silky whisper, the kind of next level where you're consumed whole, digested, fully devoured. The 17th princess suddenly felt parched, licking her lips subconsciously. "I do." Chapter 262, The Empty Town. The princess's carriage, which was on the route to Grindsail Town, suddenly had its windows shut tight. Strange noises began to emanate from within. Even with the windows closed, the half-carriage maid walking alongside could still catch faint traces of those peculiar sounds. Blushing at the odd, fragmented noises, she murmured to herself, "Princess, seriously, already starting in the carriage." While eavesdropping as discreetly as she couldn't help but grumble under her breath. Others near the carriage also noticed the odd sounds, their reactions ranging from disdainful glares to weary headshakes. Fortunately, everyone was well acquainted with the princess's peculiar ways. No one went to interrupt. The groups pretended as if nothing was happening. The head knight, anxious to put an end to such outrageous behavior, hastened the formation and urged the group to enter the town as soon as possible to find a place to rest. But just then, a scout ran up with news. The town gates were locked and no one was responding inside. The head knight and his group immediately grew displeased. Though they had come of their own accord to discuss a marriage alliance, this was still no excuse for a border town to show such disrespect. Break the gates down, then find the finest house in town and have the owners vacate it. With a few soldiers working together, the gate gave way with a loud crack. When they pushed it open, they saw the wooden beam used to bar it had already snapped and fallen to the ground. HMPH, locking up this early in the night. No wonder this border town is so impoverished, a soldier sneered. They exchanged smug looks. One soldier ran back to report while the rest led the way in. Only the guide, who had spent several years in the Borderfall city, looked uncertain. "As far as I remember, Grindsail Town used to be bustling. Why are they locking up so early, and why is it so quiet?" A sense of unease crept into him. Even the summer night breeze felt a little too cold. He rubbed at the goosebumps on his arms, wondering if he should put on an extra layer. That unease, once rooted in the guide alone, quickly spread throughout the entire group. As they walked through the silent village streets, their initial arrogance gradually gave way to nervous suspicion. Eyes darted left and right, hopping to catch sight of another living soul. But even after reaching the town center, not a single person was seen. "Something's wrong. Check the houses along the road. Even if people are asleep, drag them out." Unable to hold back any longer, the head knight barked an order at the soldiers around him. Although the eerie silence of Grindsail Town had the soldiers on edge, courage returned when they moved in a group. With loud shouts and rough shoves, they stormed into one of the houses, breaking the door down with brute force. But as the last soldier entered, the door suddenly slammed shut behind them. The people still standing in the street jumped in fright. And just like that, the rowdy noise from inside the house vanished completely. They waited a long while, but no further sound came from within, nor did the soldiers return. Those already unsettled by the strange closing of the door began to glance at each other, worry growing in their eyes. The head knight yanked the guide toward him. "Are you sure this is Grindsail Town?" "This is it, definitely." The guide, sensing that a single misstep could cost him his life, stammered frantically. "I even saw the town's name carved above the gate." The head knight had also seen the town's name carved into the wall, but the oppressive unease gnawed at him. He couldn't help but confirm again. "I'll ask the wizard." Grindsail Town supposedly had two first-rank apprentices. It was plausible something strange might occur if something had happened to them. But the head knight took comfort in the fact that their own group included a third-rank wizard apprentice. He tugged the reins and galloped toward the last, unassuming carriage in the group, a carriage no one dared treat lightly. "My lord, something's off about this town. Would you please step out and take a look?" He quickly dismounted and approached the carriage, intending to help the wizard down personally. But he waited a while, and no response came from within. "My lord," he called again, louder this time. Still no answer. The knight, now visibly shaken, threw caution aside and leapt onto the carriage, yanking the door open. The carriage was empty. Hoo-hoo! The lantern inside still flickered steadily. A piece of parchment lay spread on the small table, a quill fallen to the floor at some point. A drop of black ink had splattered onto the fine sheepskin rug. But the arrogant wizard apprentice was gone. The knight bolted from the carriage in a panic and seized the coachman by the collar, hurling him to the ground. "Where is the wizard?" The coachman was so terrified he could hardly move. Trembling on the ground, he stammered, I don't know. Before we entered the town, the Lord asked me where we were, but after that he didn't say a word." The knight questioned everyone nearby. Had anyone seen the wizard exit the carriage? Every answer was the same, no. "All of you turn around now. We're leaving this town immediately." The knight, practically falling apart, mounted his horse in a frenzy and galloped toward the princess's carriage. "Your Highness, please sit tight, we need to leave. This place is not right." The words tumbled out in panic, but the strange noises from within the carriage still hadn't stopped. It was as if the two people inside were still enjoying themselves. He could bear it no longer. Turning his head aside, he shoved open the carriage door. "Ah-h!" The knight didn't look inside, but the nearby maid did, and what she saw made her shriek uncontrollably. Her piercing scream stabbed at Knight's eardrums, making his heart lurch. He couldn't hold back anymore and turned to look. "Ah-h!" Even the normally composed Knight couldn't suppress his horror. His legs buckled beneath the weight of his armor, and with a clang, he collapsed to the ground. The princess hadn't disappeared, or rather, she still existed in some form. Her lavish court gown remained, draped elegantly on the seat. But the figure inside was no longer a beautiful woman, but a grotesque mass of swollen blood blisters. When the door opened, the creature within the gown began to stir. It twisted slowly, as if trying to turn its head, but it had no face, no hair, no way to tell whether it was turning toward or away from them. As it moved, the blood blisters rubbed against one another, producing a faintly lurid, heart-racing, rustling sound. A slit slowly opened in the mass of bubbles where its head should have been. "Help!" But before the plea could escape its throat, the countless blisters that formed the humanoid figure burst all at once. Pop, 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 pop. Blood-red fluid surged forth from the ruptured blisters, soaking the gown's support structure and flooding the floor of the carriage. When the carpet could absorb no more, the crimson liquid flowed outward. Some of it dripped through the seams of the carriage, the rest surged toward the door. Whoosh! At that moment, the knight thought he heard the crashing of waves. "Run," he whispered, almost afraid to disturb the blood. Forcing himself to his feet, he turned and sprinted toward the town gate. Gone was the noble bearing of a knight. Gone were his responsibilities and composure. He didn't care about the terrified crowd behind him. He just wanted to escape. More and more of the blood-red fluid poured from the carriage. With a great crash, the entire carriage gave way, shattering into splinters and washing outward in a crimson tide. Chapter 263. You have to leave now. Yud. When the leading knight captain abandoned his comrades and fled alone, The rest of the Keena's betrothal entourage finally snapped out of their stupor. They screamed in terror and scattered in all directions. Some, too slow to react, were struck by the red tide after just a few steps. Their eyes immediately went blank as they collapsed to the ground. More of the red water surged forth, covering their bodies completely. The crimson tide greedily swirled around their corpses, even pausing its outward spread to feast on them. Thanks to that, a few lucky ones managed to escape their doom, at least for the moment. A few minutes earlier, Saul and Machi Machi had just stepped into Ada's dilapidated little courtyard. "Why come here first? Why?" Machi Machi asked in confusion. He couldn't see anything special about this place in the context of the entire town. "I want to confirm something," Saul replied. The front gate of the courtyard, still damaged from their last visit, hung askew and unrepaired. Saul stepped into the yard and looked straight toward the room that had belonged to Ada. Then, through the gap between the boards on the window, he saw a single eye, silver, and gleaming like a galaxy. Machi Machi noticed Saul had stopped and curiously stepped around him. "What is it? An enemy?" Saul raised his index finger in a gesture for silence. "I'm going over to take a look. I think I might know who it is." Could it be Penny and Ada? Had they come back? No, Penny's eyes had long since lost that starry silver glow, and with their abilities and status, it was impossible for them to still be in Grind Sail Town, unless someone was forcing them to stay. Machi Machi's thin brows lifted slightly. Could there be other wizard apprentices who came in too? His heart grew uneasy. That's right, the grave ritual outside is so obvious. Aside from Saul, who's still unfamiliar with curses, any other third-rank apprentice who saw it would be tempted to investigate. He looked around the yard, but saw no one living and nothing out of the ordinary. "I'll wait outside," he said, stepping back out of the courtyard. Saul, keeping an eye on the diary's reactions, didn't object. "Once I entered the town, I didn't need to act together with Machi Machi. That guy probably goes around resolving the town's curses on his own, drawing enemy attention, which actually makes things a lot safer for me." No matter what the reason is that the diary no longer issued death warnings, Saul was happy to act separately from Machi Machi. Still, that eye, like a silver galaxy, had left him uneasy. Was it another hallucination? A sharp, piercing scream suddenly shattered the silence between him and Machi Machi. The Machi Machi's expression shifted, and he immediately said, "I'll go check it out." He tossed Saul a gold coin. Saul caught it and took a closer look. It was an ancient coin, barely distinguishable as such. Both sides bore the same image, a smiling, beautiful woman's face. The edge of the coin was engraved with miniature magical runes. These runes were in the common magical language Saul was most familiar with. Rolling the coin across his fingers, Saul quickly deciphered the basic information: connection, sensing, and transmission. It was a magical tool for communication. "If you need me, tap your ear with the coin 3 times, then speak into it," Machi Machi said. Without waiting for a response, he bent his knees and kicked off the ground. Whoosh! He soared into the neighboring street. Like a rabbit, he bounded from rooftop to rooftop, quickly closing in on the source of the scream. Saul didn't know what had happened over there, but he had no intention of interfering. He turned back to Ada's old room. The silver eye had vanished. Penny and Ada should have left already. That silver eye just now probably an illusion. After all, Machi Machi said this place is cursed. It's normal for there to be weird things that mess with his perception. Saul tilted his chin. "Little Algie, go check it out." Little Algie answered immediately, darting toward the window without hesitation. It didn't break in, but instead sent a smaller offshoot through the cracks between the boards. After a while, the offshoot returned and remerged with the main body. Little Algae shook its head, nothing found. Saul let it return and narrowed his eyes at the house. Even in semi-immersive meditation, he detected no lingering spirit or corruption. The place was unusually clean, just like when he'd last visited. But last time, that was because the wandering wizard here had been collecting vengeful spirits on purpose. What about this time? Is this town's curse also targeting spirits? Thinking of that silver starlight eye, so much like a nightmare butterfly's cocoon, Saul decided to go in for a closer look. Other things he could ignore, but nightmare butterflies. Something told him this one might be important to him. He moved forward, a spherical barrier of magical armor forming around his body. Even though Little Algae hadn't found anything, Saul activated his soul armor spell as a precaution before approaching Ada's old house. The door wasn't locked. With a light push, it creaked open with an unpleasant groan. Saul stepped inside and made a circuit around the room, even checking the little cupboard Penny used to live in. Whenever Ada went out, Penny would peer out from between the cupboard and the window to observe the outside world. She could never really see anything, but it seemed like she could sense people's presence and emotions. That was probably her only joy during a dull childhood. But after thoroughly searching the room, Saul still found nothing. Was it really just a hallucination? Saul didn't rush to leave. It's possible. But with his current mental strength, he shouldn't be so easily affected by illusions, unless the one casting them is at the level of a true wizard. Even with mental power on par with a true wizard, Saul didn't let arrogance cloud his judgment. Still, since Penny and Ada are gone, there's no reason to linger. Saul climbed to the roof later to check for any other anomalies in the town, then tried to avoid them while looking for the residences of those two wandering apprentices. If there's anywhere left in this town with grinding sound fruits, it would be at their place. But just as Saul was about to step out of the house, a voice came from behind him. "Brother Saul." His entire body tensed in an instant. The blood vessels on his temples were visibly throbbing. He slowly turned around and saw Penny peeking out of the cupboard, her little face adorned with a familiar, innocent smile. Her arms were crossed and resting on the cupboard's lower edge. She tilted her head, cheek resting on her arms, those starry eyes fixed precisely in Saul's direction. "Penny?" Saul didn't make a move, not before figuring out if this was a dangerous illusion. "Brother Saul, you should go," she said with that same sweet smile down to the very curve of her lips. "Listen, the red tide is coming. If you don't leave now, you won't be able to." As if her words had flipped a switch, the moment her voice fell, Saul suddenly heard it. Waves crashing against rocks. Splash, splash, splash. Chapter 264, I Set That Fire. Saul backed away slowly, but he wasn't planning to leave just yet. His current principle of action was simple. As long as the diary doesn't say no, then no one else gets to say no. Penny watched him retreat but made no other move. But just as Saul reached the doorway, he suddenly flung his hand toward Penny. Two black tendrils, slightly different in shape, shot out. One aimed at Penny's head, the other at her shoulder. However, the moment the tendrils touched her body, Penny suddenly vanished. Along with her disappearance, the sound of rushing tides from outside also abruptly stopped. Saul wasn't worried that he had attacked the real Penny. He hadn't sensed any trace of a living person on her. Even so, he had still held back during the attack. He'd sent the independently conscious Little Algae to strike her head, while using the first-tier spell Frost Touch to target her shoulder. Once Penny's illusion disappeared, Little Algae braked hard and came to a stop. But the spell Frost Touch continued, and smashed through the small cabinet where Penny's illusion had stood. Thanks to the spell's freezing property, the cabinet didn't scatter into debris. Instead, it froze in place, shattered but still intact in form. "Why didn't you listen to me? Why did you have to come in here?" Suddenly, the voice of the old madman came from the courtyard. Turning around, Saul saw the ragged figure of the madman sighing heavily. There was no trace of life on this person either. Another illusion. Having learned from before, Saul didn't waste magic to attack. If the fake Penny could talk, then this fake madman should be able to as well. He smiled, slowly approaching as he asked, "Did everyone who came into this town die?" The old man's eyes filled with sorrow. "Yes, all dead, no one escaped." "Who killed them?" The old man froze for a moment, eyes going blank as if trying to recall. "It was the red tide." The red tide again. And as those words left the madman's lips, the sound of waves returned. But this time, it was noticeably closer than before. Saul narrowed his eyes but still couldn't see any attached soul on the old man. The one who was supposed to have slaughtered the residents of Grind Sail Town was Machi Machi, but it seemed even he hadn't known about the blood-red tide. Did someone come after Machi Machi left and turn this dead land into a breeding ground for curses? "Do you know where in town I might still find some grinding sound fruit?" "Grinding sound fruit," the old man repeated. "What's grinding sound fruit?" Saul frowned. So this illusion only knows what happened before its death. The old madman's eyes drifted again. Suddenly, he began urging Saul once more. "Go, leave. If you don't go now, it'll be too late." Saul asked several other questions, but all the madman would say was for him to leave. Running out of patience, Saul asked coldly, "If there are no living people left here, then what are you?" The madman froze, his expression going hazy again, but this time he didn't recover. "I told them not to deal with barbarians, not to," he mumbled, swaying as he staggered away. "The whole village was destroyed. His running posture was strange. One hand held behind his back as if carrying something, the other waving frantically like signaling for help. Where is he going now? Saul frowned and gave chase. The old man seemed to hear his footsteps. He glanced back, his expression conflicted. Then, as if tripping on thin air despite being on level ground, he stumbled, barely managing to regain his footing. After that, he never looked back and quickly disappeared out of the alley. This guy, Saul's suspicion deepened. This madman had always been mysterious. He'd evaded Little Algie's detection, knew the secrets of Grind Sail Town, and kept vanishing and reappearing unpredictably. Saul had already found him strange before, not quite mad, not quite sane. And now even his illusion was just as weird. Saul couldn't resist following a few more steps out of the courtyard, but the moment he stepped outside, the madman was gone. Of course, it was possible his illusion had simply vanished. And the moment the madman disappeared, the sound of crashing waves halted again. Illusions disappearing at random, that's normal, I guess. With both the madman and Penny gone, Saul decided not to linger. "Little Algie, get me onto the roof." Obediently, Little Algie lifted him onto the rooftop. This courtyard wasn't particularly tall, but it was enough for Saul to see the nearby blocks. The house of a wizard apprentice has to be the most luxurious one. Saul spun in place, scanning the town for the grandest-looking building. But the next moment he froze. In a street nearby, he spotted a third person. It was Aunt Jenny, the one who seemed warm-hearted on the surface but was cold at her core. She was huddled in the corner of an alley, clutching a black shadow tightly in her arms. Saul could clearly hear her terrified voice. "Please don't do this." Jenny was shaking her head desperately. Is this the moment before she died? As Saul narrowed his eyes, he realized to his surprise, this Jenny didn't seem to be an illusion but a soul. But why didn't I sense any soul nearby when I came through earlier? Is the curse over this town hiding the movements of the soul? This curse is really strange. Is it just a curse or something more aggressive? Saul scanned the area cautiously, but didn't spot any other souls. Just as he was about to ignore Aunt Jenny, her wailing suddenly grew louder, filled with fury and despair. "How could you be so cruel? Jasmine is only 12, please, let me take her place, let me be the sacrifice instead." Jasmine. Saul remembered Jenny shouting in the crowd earlier that she didn't have a daughter. Could it be that after I left, someone came for a girl she was close to? As that thought crossed his mind, Jenny's agonized cry rang out again. "No!" Without hesitation, Saul leapt directly from the rooftop to the alley where she was. In just a few steps, he reached the crazed Aunt Jenny and noticed this version of her was much younger than the one he'd seen before. She was kneeling on the ground, staring blankly toward the alley's entrance. The black shadow she had been clutching was now gone. And in that instant, Saul understood. This isn't a vision of her death. It's the most painful memory of her life. That Jasmine must have been her friend, or perhaps her sister. So while Jenny had no daughter, that didn't mean she had no grief. Saul reached out toward the collapsed Jenny. As his arm moved, a nearly invisible phantom needle extended from his fingertips and pierced her soul form, injecting a bit of starlight energy into her. Jenny wasn't under his control, but that didn't stop him from mimicking what he'd seen in the mental realm and giving her some power. It was an experiment. At worst, he'd lose a bit of soul energy. At best, he might get something unexpected. Fortunately, this time, the result was a good one. The dazed Jenny, staring into the alley, suddenly became much livelier after receiving Saul's energy. Her eyes slowly turned toward him, as if only now realizing he was there. "Thank you, who are you?" Jenny vaguely sensed that Saul had helped her, but when she looked at this gray-skinned boy, he felt strangely familiar, yet she couldn't quite place him. "Do you know where Grinding Sound fruit is usually stored in town, or where those two wizard lords lived?" Saul didn't bother with identities. He had no idea how long the energy he gave her would keep her lucid, so he got straight to the point. "Grinding Sound fruit," Jenny repeated, going hazy again the moment she heard the word. "It's not a good thing, don't look for it, don't." Suddenly, she leaned in so close their noses nearly touched. Her face filled Saul's vision. "I'll tell you a secret, I set that fire." Then she broke into a twisted smile. The more she laughed, the wider her mouth stretched, until it swallowed up the rest of her features. In the end, her entire face was nothing but a gaping maw. Chapter 265, Hidden Motives. Aunt Jenny, in front of him, was now completely immersed in a painful yet exhilarating memory of the past. That fire, Saul suddenly realized. So the burning of the Grinding Sound fruit fields had been Aunt Jenny's doing. Even the townsfolk probably never suspected that this woman, always so passionate about preserving the Holy Maiden's fruit sacrifice tradition, was in fact the one who hated the Grinding Sound fruit the most. Or rather, she hated the Grinding Sound fruit, and hated the people of this town even more. Now the consciousness of Aunt Jenny's soul had completely collapsed, showing signs of corruption. Perhaps it was because true clarity brought the deepest pain. She was still laughing, until her entire head twisted grotesquely, becoming one giant, gaping mouth. Had her soul been powerful enough, Aunt Jenny might have transformed into a real wraith right then. Unfortunately, she was just an ordinary person. In both life and death, all that awaited her was soul collapse, shattering into dust. Saul stood up. His needle-like right hand flicked with a snap. An octopus-like tentacle shot out, slamming hard into Jenny's soul before sucking it dry like slurping jelly. At the same time, a trace of evil thought from Jenny entered Saul's soul body. The diary stirred eagerly, seemingly desiring to purify this trace of evil. But Saul shook his head gently, stopping the diary from cleansing it. "I imagine you wouldn't be content to just vanish like this. Why not come with me for a while? See for yourself the fate of this seemingly warm but truly cold-hearted little town. Saul leapt back onto the rooftop across the street. This time, as he searched for the most lavish house in town, he also scanned for any other lingering souls. But just then, the sound of surging tides reached his ears again. It was closer this time, so close it seemed to be flowing within 100 meters. Yet looking out over the town, everything remained pristine. No red water, no streams. Though he saw nothing, and the tidal sound vanished again just as quickly, Saul felt his nerves tighten with each closer wave. I have to move faster. I can't stop for souls that don't know where the apprentices live. He vaulted across several blocks and landed on the town's most bustling street. From the rooftops, he'd already noticed this area housed the most magnificent buildings in Grind Sale Town. But even here there were 3 or 4 such grand homes. Without further clues, he might have to check each one, an enormous waste of time. Just then, he spotted a lone figure staggering through the street. The man's armor and clothing didn't match the styles of Kema Duchy or its vassal regions. He appeared to be from even farther away. More importantly, he was just an ordinary person. In a place cursed like this, that meant he could die at any moment. Saul watched him carefully avoid all buildings, steering clear of windows and doors, keeping strictly to the center of the road. The man shivered as he moved, glancing warily in every direction. He hadn't gone mad yet, but he was certainly close to breaking. And the most crucial part, he was alive. So there are other people inside this town. That matrix of graves at the entrance, was it really just part of a curse ritual? Or was it bait? After all that had happened, Saul no longer believed the mastermind's goal was simply to curse the town. There had to be something bigger at play, a deeper ambition and a hungrier appetite. He recalled the strange expression on Machi Machi's face as the senior entered the town. Perhaps that brief encounter hadn't been as honest as he'd assumed. Either Machi Machi was the one pulling the strings, or he'd changed his plans after seeing the curse for himself. Saul's arm lowered, and a golden antique coin rolled into his palm. Both sides bore the smile of a beautiful woman. He flicked the coin through his fingers, letting it spin and dance across his knuckles. But he didn't use it to contact Machi Machi. Instead, he tucked it back away. Just then, the man walking down the center of the street suddenly screamed and turned to flee, as if 10 starving wolves were chasing him. But when Saul looked in the same direction, he saw nothing. Moments later, though, a soul appeared around the corner, a man in half armor wielding a curved blade. "Is that Captain Jeff?" Saul turned back toward the fleeing man. Did he see something? Something that let him sense Jeff's presence in advance? Or has this town already taken on a different appearance in the eyes of the living? That would make sense. Ordinary people's mental strength weren't as strong as a wizard, and they lacked the protection of magic. Even minor exposure to the curse could cause terrifying hallucinations, let alone in a fully cursed town. Saul didn't flee. Instead, he leapt straight in front of Captain Jeff. "Hello, Captain Jeff." "Who are you?" Jeff looked far more normal than Aunt Jenny had been. "I'm a wandering wizard, just passing through. I'd like you to take me to meet your town's resident wizard." Saul had no idea what kind of illusion Jeff was under, so he made something up, asking to be guided to the wizard's dwelling. "No, I'm on patrol." To Saul's surprise, the soul version of Jeff was quite firm. He refused. "If you don't take me, I'll kill you," Saul said coldly. "I'm on patrol. Please don't interfere with my duty to protect the town." Jeff answered solemnly, then tried to walk around Saul and continue down the street. "Okay, I take it back. There's no such thing as a normal soul," Saul muttered, shaking his head with a self-deprecating chuckle. "Hey," he called out. Thankfully, Jeff still retained enough instinct to respond. The next moment, A translucent giant hand suddenly slammed down on a nearby building, smashing one of its corners into rubble with the sheer force of a wizard's spell. If you won't lead me there, I'll destroy the town you're trying to protect. Saul knew full well that destroying an entire town was beyond his capabilities, but bluffing worked just fine on a confused soul. All right, the dutiful Captain Jeff hesitated as he stared at the broken wall. Then he finally relented. Follow me. And with that, Jeff turned and led Saul into the same luxurious mansion Saul had just partially demolished. Saul, really? The wizard is inside. If you need something, go ask them. You think they'd keep anything important here? I don't know what you're talking about. I have to go. I'm busy keeping the town safe. With that, Jeff turned and resumed his patrol. Captain Jeff, Saul called after him, are you protecting the town or its people? Jeff's steps faltered for a moment, but he didn't answer. He kept walking. Saul chuckled softly and headed into the mansion's depths. Once he entered, the front door quietly closed, guided by an invisible hand. Meanwhile, from the crack in the corner of the building, where it had been smashed earlier, a stream of red liquid began to seep out. The crimson fluid spread, pooling into a shallow puddle, then deepening into a small basin of water. The sound of waves lapping against stone echoed again. Splash, splash. Chapter 266, Machi Machi's Ordeal. At the other end of the town, a lanky man dressed in a black formal suit, Machi Machi, was striding anxiously down the street, carrying an unconscious maid in one hand. He arrived at the town's perimeter wall and tried to leap over it, but the moment he landed on top, he was thrown back by an invisible barrier. How interesting, how very interesting. This curse is enormous. It's enveloped the entire town, and the force of impact gets evenly distributed across the barrier. With our power, there's no breaking through unless we find a weak point. Damn it. The town gates aren't a way out. Even the sky's highest point isn't it. Where the hell is the exit? At that moment, the sound of rushing water echoed behind him. He spun around quickly, only to see a massive wave of blood, like a tsunami, surging down the street in hot pursuit. Machi Machi's brows drew together in a deep frown. This wasn't the first time he'd seen this. Suddenly, he hurled one of the maids into the wave. When the blood swallowed her up, he turned and dashed away with the only remaining maid. He tried to use spells to resist the wave before, but his spells were instantly consumed. In contrast, throwing in a living person could temporarily slow the blood down. He'd already tossed quite a few living people he came across during his search. By now, Machi Machi was certain. This wasn't some site for cultivating a curse. It was a domain-level curse field, the work of a true wizard. But how could such a cursed domain appear in the human principality? How? Machi Machi's lips twisted bitterly. Whoever laid this trap, they even put up a front outside to lure me in. After hearing Saul's description, he had assumed this was a site where someone was cultivating a curse. Such places usually originated from either a powerful seed of malice or a terrifying wraith. Either one would be a priceless treasure for a third-rank apprentice. Greed had flared in Machi Machi's heart in an instant. He had claimed to be upholding the dignity of the Wizard Tower, but the truth was, he wanted to beat others to the punch and snatch the curse's core before it fully matured. A curse cultivated using an entire town, it would surely be devastatingly powerful. So Machi Machi had rushed here with Saul, then quickly split up to find the curse's source. After all, a cultivated curse could recognize a master. If he was late, it would belong to someone else. But the horror of this cursed domain far exceeded anything Machi Machi had imagined. At one point, he even suspected that Saul had intentionally tricked him into coming here. But Saul didn't have that kind of power, and besides, he had entered the town himself. Still, while he couldn't fight the curse, that didn't mean he couldn't flee. Earlier, Machi Machi had rescued a few survivors from where someone had screamed. Not out of kindness, of course, but because they could serve as bait to delay the blood tide. A single human life could buy him enough time to explore another block. As long as he had bait, the blood wave couldn't touch him. He'd wandered through more than half the town by now, narrowly escaping danger multiple times. And with only one living bait left, he still hadn't found a way out. Whoever had created this cursed domain, just how powerful were they? If I'm really backed into a corner, his gaze drifted toward where he'd last parted ways with Saul. Maybe Saul can buy me a little time. He opened his hand. Lying in his palm was a gold coin from ancient times. But this wasn't the same as the one he'd given Saul. Though it bore the same woman's face on both sides, this time she wore a pained expression. At that moment, the maid in his grasp stirred with a groan. Ah! The maid jolted awake, only to lock eyes with the terrifying Machi Machi, whom she feared more than anything. This dreadful wizard had once saved her, and the others while they were fleeing. At first, they had thought he was a rescue sent by the Kemaduchi. But soon after, he had forced them to explore the cursed town with him. Every time the blood wave appeared, he'd sacrifice one of them to slow it down. At first, they'd accepted this approach, thinking they would soon escape. But as time passed, the maid realized this wizard had no intention of leaving. The ones being sacrificed wouldn't just be a few, it would be all of them. When only 3 of them remained, the group finally broke down and tried to scatter. The maid hadn't gotten far when her whole body suddenly went numb, and she blacked out. Now waking up again, she found herself still in the hands of that terrifying wizard. She looked around. She was the only one left. Sob, sob, despair surged in the maid's chest. She could hardly believe that in just half a day, their prestigious engagement entourage had been nearly wiped out. Please let me go. The maid clasped her hands in prayer under her chin, pleading. So noisy, so noisy. Can't you see I'm thinking? Machi Machi replied irritably, pressing a hand over her face. Though his hand was quickly withdrawn, the maid suddenly felt an unbearable itch spread across her skin. She reached up to touch her face and felt soft, fine fuzz, like a velvety carpet. It was oddly pleasant to the touch. But the very fact that her face felt like that filled her with horror. She clawed desperately at her own face, and then saw black hairs caught under her fingernails. She opened her mouth, about to scream, but now even her lips itched. The itching spread down into her throat, and no sound came out. The terror shattered her already fragile mind. Her eyes rolled back, and she fainted once again. Satisfied, Machi Machi hoisted up the unconscious maid. Tusk, tusk, last piece of bait, should buy me 5 more minutes. Though he'd wasted quite a few living decoys while wandering the town, Machi Machi wasn't without gain. Suddenly, he changed direction and sprinted toward the center of town. Near the town center was a small plaza. On its edge stood an old, inconspicuous clock tower. Originally, Machi Machi hadn't paid it much attention. It wasn't at the heart of town, nor was it the tallest building. It looked shabby and irrelevant. But as he reflected on his many run-ins with the blood tide, he noticed something odd. Almost every time the blood wave appeared, it surged inward from the town's edges. But when he was near the clock tower, the wave flowed out from the town center toward the tower. My previous assumption was wrong. Not all streets connect directly to the town center. The blood's flow just seems to converge there in general, but now it seems that the true destination of those tides isn't the town center. It's the clock tower. If there's no exit around the edges, then the key to escaping this cursed domain must be at its core, the clock tower. Machi Machi's thin lips stretched into a wide smile. Still carrying the unconscious maid, he leapt high, bounding from rooftop to rooftop toward the clock tower. Chapter 267, Trap. The struggling explorers inside the town had no idea that after nightfall, new wizard apprentices had been drawn to the formation of graves outside the gates, seeking to enter Grindsail Town and uncover its secrets. Billy, who was always wearing a scowl, for once had a trace of a smile on his face. He crouched at the edge of a field, watching the formation of graves with great interest. Angela, cloaked from head to toe, stood behind him impatiently. "Didn't you say the town had been completely slaughtered and told me to come absorb the soul fragments? But look at these graves, they're spotless. Clearly someone else got here first." At her complaint, the faint smile at the corner of Billy's lips vanished. "What do you know? This is an auxiliary formation for cultivating curses. What's hiding in the town now is worth far more than your measly soul fragments." He stood up and looked toward the town gates in the distance. A suffocating stillness radiated outward from the town like a silent wave. A curse cultivated with the strength of an entire town. Billy licked his lips. Going in might mean death. Angela's face tightened when she heard Billy mutter to himself. After spending the past few months together, she'd come to understand just what kind of person her temporary companion really was. Anything that piqued his interest, no matter how dangerous, he'd dive in head first. As someone who had obediently stayed in the lab ever since entering the Wizard Tower, rarely participating in any risky operations, Angela had already left her comfort zone just by coming out here. Let alone these past few days, she'd practically been dragged through life-and-death situations alongside Billy. All that talk about gathering souls outside being easier, having more resources, and not needing to be so cautious like in the Wizard Tower. It was all a lie. She had finally made up her mind to return to the tower, but halfway back, Billy had been lured over by the anomalies here. Now it looked like he was seriously planning to enter that unknown town that had already become a cursed land. "I'm not going in," Angela declared firmly. "You can't leave me," Billy replied, brooking no argument. "Why not? I'm not strong enough. If I go in with you, I'll only drag you down. Just go without me. I'll wait for you back at the tower, okay?" Billy didn't respond. He showed his answer with his actions. Angela stood still at first, but as Billy walked farther and farther away, a dull ache began to stir in her lower abdomen. Damn it, she had no choice but to jog after him. Billy had poisoned her with a special toxin. Unless he gave her a temporary antidote, Angela couldn't stray more than 100 meters from him. Otherwise, the pain in her abdomen would spread to her entire body. And as for what kind of damage that would eventually lead to, Angela didn't dare test it. Billy knew she wouldn't risk her life to test his poison, so he calmly placed a hand on the town gate. A pale green gas seeped from his palm, spreading across the wooden gate. The gas was highly corrosive. Upon contact, it began eating through the wooden gate and the wooden bolt behind it, forming a large hole. Soon the hole widened enough for a person to walk through upright. Billy didn't wait for Angela. He walked straight into the town. Angela followed reluctantly, keeping some distance behind him as she stepped over the fallen wood fragments. The moment she crossed the threshold of the gate, Angela suddenly heard the sound of water. But it wasn't the normal sound of flowing water. It reminded her of a massive flood that once struck her hometown. A raging river that crushed everything in its path. In the face of such a flood, it didn't matter if you ran or not. No one could escape. In the end, all would be swept away, their bodies mixing with mud, stone, and broken branches, becoming part of the flood's force, helping it wreak even greater destruction. Angela bit her lip, her face pale. Just then, her left hand suddenly shot up to block her path. "What's the point of warning me now?" Angela murmured bitterly. "Why didn't you stop Billy earlier?" She knew it was the evil intent within her left hand, warning her of danger. Of course she knew there was danger. Dragging her feet heavily, Angela followed Billy deeper into the town. They walked along the main road for some time. At a fork, Billy suddenly veered into a narrow side alley, as if he had discovered something. Angela had been keeping a distance, but when she saw his figure vanish around the corner, she panicked and rushed after him, afraid of losing him for real. However, Billy hadn't gone far down the alley. He stood before the gate of a small courtyard. Angela skidded to a stop and peered around the corner. "What's so special about this place?" she asked, looking at the damaged gate. "Looks like a house for commoners." "Something showed up here," Billy said, eyes fixed on the courtyard. "The flies I released vanished the moment they entered." He jerked his chin at her. "Send in one of your souls." Since leaving the wizard tower, Angela had performed several sacrificial rites with corpse flowers under Billy's instruction. Thanks to the high quality and abundance of the souls Billy provided, far more than what was available within the tower, Angela had quickly gained several soul servants. They were great for scouting danger ahead. She had reaped real benefits from this, which softened some of her resentment toward Billy. Now was the perfect time to use a soul. A hideous, translucent face suddenly surfaced on Angela's otherwise lovely features. It twisted and struggled, desperate to flee. But it seemed glued to her skin. As it tried to break free, a dreadful tearing noise echoed between them. Angela's beautiful face twisted in pain. Clearly, the separation hurt her as well. Wanting to end the torment quickly, she gritted her teeth and flung her head back. With a series of sharp, splintering cracks, the soul finally detached. It immediately tried to escape. Fortunately, it was already facing the courtyard when it detached from Angela, so it dashed straight into the yard. Saved her the trouble of issuing a command. But the instant the terrifying face crossed into the courtyard, both Billy and Angela suddenly heard the sound of crashing waves. Angela had heard it once before, when they first entered the town, but it had disappeared quickly. She assumed it was a magical effect and hadn't paid it any mind. The next moment, scarlet water began to seep from the cracks in the wooden boards covering a rear window of the courtyard. The flow quickly grew, gathering into a red tide at an unbelievable pace. The red liquid slapped against the walls, with the sound of ocean waves crashing on rocks. Billy took a step back, face darkening. "Run!" he barked and turned to flee. Angela hadn't even realized the danger before her collar was yanked hard. She stumbled backward a few steps before twisting agilely to follow him. "My soul, I didn't retrieve it." "You won't get it back." Billy's voice was cold. "We've been tricked. This isn't a site where a curse is being formed. It's already a fully formed cursed domain." "You're the one who got tricked," Angela thought, rolling her eyes behind his back. "I never wanted to come in here from the start." Chapter 268, The Tolling Bell. Billy gritted his teeth, his expression grim. That grave formation outside wasn't an auxiliary curse ritual at all. It was a bait set up to lure in people with some knowledge of curse cultivation. It was the first time Angela had ever seen Billy so angry. Her own expression grew more serious. "Is it that dangerous? Even you can't handle it?" Although she had gone through one dangerous situation after another since leaving the tower, Billy had always appeared calm and in control, never like this. While running, Billy glanced back at her, his eyes complex. That look made Angela's heart skip a beat. "I'll protect you," he said. Then he pulled her into another street. Strangely, the moment they stepped onto the new road, the sound of the surging tide behind them suddenly disappeared. Billy halted and looked back down the alley. The red current that had been chasing them, flowing close on their heels, had vanished as well. Billy frowned and began to ponder what might have triggered the curse, when suddenly he heard Angela gasp beside him. "Saul, what are you doing here?" Saul had just stepped out of the house, where the wandering apprentice wizards had once lived. He looked down at the small cloth pouch in his hand and sighed. There were indeed some leftover grinding sound fruits, but most had already rotted. I picked through everything and only managed to find about 10. At most, there'll be enough for 2 long mental realm experiments. Maybe there were more elsewhere in town, but Saul couldn't afford to linger. He hadn't forgotten the death warning from the diary. The longer he stayed and the more he explored, the greater the chance he'd accidentally stumble behind the scenes. Well, I've got some at least. Maybe just 2 more experiments and I'll be able to completely turn the diary into a locator. For now, I'd better focus on leaving. No idea where that Machi Machi wandered off to. Just as he thought this, the sound of a bell rang out. This town has a bell tower, Saul tried to recall. I think it does. Almost every town had a bell tower to summon civilians, so he hadn't paid much attention to it before. Now that he heard the tolling bell, he had no intention of checking it out. Instead, he turned and ran in the opposite direction, toward the town gates. He wasn't greedy. He came here for grinding sound fruit, and now that he had it, it was time to leave. As for Machi Machi, that guy might not even want to leave. At this point, it should be just the 2 of them left in town, and that bell, it was probably Machi Machi's doing, especially since he had deliberately split from Saul earlier. Clearly, he didn't want company. So Saul didn't hesitate. He dashed through the opulent residential district and made his way onto the town's widest main avenue, planning to follow the broad road straight to the town gate. But just as he stepped onto the avenue, 2 figures turned the corner from a diagonal alley. It was Billy and Angela. What are they doing here? Saul's thoughts raced. Before he could decide what to do, Angela looked up and caught sight of him. "Saul, what are you doing here?" Hearing her shout, Billy immediately turned his head. He had been too focused on analyzing the red tide earlier to notice there were others nearby. But upon seeing Saul, Billy didn't appear surprised at all. It was as if Saul's presence made perfect sense. Since they had run into each other head-on, Saul didn't bother hiding. "I'm leaving. What about you two?" Saul made it clear from the start that he wasn't interested in competing for the source of the curse within the town. The strange phenomena hadn't ceased. Since Machi Machi had spotted the clues from the grave formation outside, someone as reputable as Billy among third-rank apprentices surely saw it too. Billy was the kind of guy who could drive Mentor Guido into depression. Surprisingly, Billy had come to the same decision. "We're leaving too." Angela glanced at Saul, then at Billy, and finally opened her arms with a smile. "Well then, let's go together." In her eyes, Billy was a seasoned third-rank apprentice, and Saul was the Tower Master's personal student. Both were incredibly strong. If this town was as dangerous as Billy said, traveling with these 2 gave her a better shot at escaping. But Angela's left hand didn't share her optimism. It anxiously tugged at the fabric over her chest, looking more nervous than anyone else present. Saul was slightly surprised. They weren't here for the curse's source either. Billy, with a dark expression, gave Saul a nod, silently agreeing to the joint departure. Just then the bell tolled again, and all 3 of them turned toward the sound. At the end of the avenue stood a small plaza, and across from it was a somewhat dilapidated but still standing bell tower. From where they were, they could see the bell swinging at the top. There was a rope attached to the bell's clapper, clearly meant to be pulled to make it toll. But no one was visible. As the bell rang out, the sound of waves surged again, this time surrounding Saul like a surround sound system. It was even closer now. It felt like it was right nearby. Saul knew that if they lingered any longer, they might run straight into the red tide. "Let's go!" Saul gave a quick shout and ran toward the town gate. Angela had been keeping an eye on the other 2, and when Saul took off, she didn't hesitate to follow. She figured if Saul and Billy were both running, Billy wouldn't stay behind either. Sure enough, the sound of footsteps followed her an instant later. The three of them sprinted without any concern for appearances. Fortunately, after running several hundred meters, the roar of the tide faded behind them. They followed their original route and reached the town's main gate. But what met their eyes was a perfectly intact gate, with a 2-meter-long square beam firmly lodged in place to lock it. Angela covered her mouth in shock. How? We clearly corroded the door when we came in. Why is it whole again? The door was whole when you came in. Saul frowned at the gate. Machi and I smashed it open when we entered. This isn't surprising, Billy said coldly. If it's a trap meant to catch people, of course the cage door has to be sealed. As the strongest among them, he didn't hold back. He stepped forward and pressed his hand against the gate, releasing a faint green gas like before. But this time it didn't work. The gas hovered around the door, touching it, but to no effect. Billy retracted the gas, leaned in, and examined the gap between his hand and the gate. His face darkened. Then he unleashed a more powerful attack, Corrosive Claw. The ghostly green talon slammed hard into the gate. But the gate didn't budge, not even a scratch. After several failed attempts, the claw dissipated helplessly. Angela was about to say something when Saul suddenly fired an arrow spell at the top of the wall. Predictably, the arrow struck an invisible barrier with a clang, snapped in two, and fell to the ground inside the town. Looks like we really are trapped in a cage, Saul murmured. Chapter 269, Searching for a Ship. Saul narrowed his eyes and looked toward the air above the town walls. He didn't see any barrier that had intercepted his arrow. His semi-immersive meditation method was quite effective for observing spiritual bodies and corruption, but when it came to curses, it wasn't of much use. So he simply chose to observe the air above the town walls with his naked eyes, meticulously. At last, between the inside and outside of the town, he vaguely caught sight of a transparent shell, like plastic. The shell extended upward from the town walls, converging in the air to form a dome-shaped canopy. But it wasn't truly a dome. Saul walked up to the base of the wall and quickly dug a half-meter-deep hole. Beneath the ground at the foot of the wall, he touched another transparent barrier. Heaven and earth alike are sealed. We've nowhere to run. Saul turned and said to Billy, "Senior, do you have a more powerful attack?" Angela jumped in. "Let's all use our strongest attacks, target one spot at the same time. Maybe we can push this transparent wall past its limit." But to her surprise, Billy shook his head. "I observed the wall while it was under attack earlier. My conclusion is that it can withstand several times the focus power of a corrosive claw." His gaze swept over the two. "Unless one of you can cast a third-tier spell or has a scroll of similar strength, don't bother wasting your magic. If brute force isn't an option, there must be another way out, right?" Saul returned and patted the dirt off his hands. "Do we have to break the curse in order to shatter the barrier?" "In theory, yes," Bill nodded slightly. The next second, Saul and Billy turned their heads at the same time, both looking toward the center of town, the clock tower. Angela saw their movements and felt a chill in her heart. "We still have to go back there." She didn't want to take the risk, so her first instinct was to find a place to hide. "Unless you can keep flying in the air, there's nowhere to hide," Billy said coldly. Saul recalled what the soul had said when he first arrived, and the increasingly loud sound of surging water. "You mean that rushing water noise?" Billy nodded. "I read about a curse in a book once. The pattern matches this place quite closely." "What?" Angela's eyes lit up. "Then you must know how to escape already, right?" Billy ignored her and instead spoke to Saul. The curse was called the world-destroying black tide. It described a black, corrosive flood that wiped out all living and undead beings within a designated area. But the problem is, the The tide I just saw was blood red. Blood red, Saul's heart stirred. Sounds like they've already encountered the tide directly, but I've been here longer and have only heard the sound of it. What did they do to trigger a direct encounter? Although he thought this, Saul kept a look of lingering fear on his face. In that case, maybe we can reference the method used to break that curse, Saul said. I thought the same, Billy nodded. There are two ways to break the world-destroying black tide curse. One is to violently destroy the energy fueling the curse. The other is to find a ship. If you can ride out the curse's eruption aboard the ship, you can leave. But brute forcing the black tide curse requires at least a true wizard. In terms of raw attack power, even together, we're not enough. Then we'll have to try the second option, Saul said. Even though this isn't the black tide but a red tide, it's clearly not something we can withstand. If we're looking for a suitable ship. The clock tower, Billy finished. Saul met his eyes. They were clearly thinking the same thing. Do we really have to go back? We just ran away from there, Angela said nervously, wringing her hands. What if we run into the red tide again? We only heard the water last time. We didn't actually see the red waves, Billy replied. If we do run into them this time, we'll have to find a way around. After the discussion, the three of them didn't hesitate further and sprinted toward the clock tower. Angela deliberately lagged behind, thinking that if danger struck, the other two would take the brunt of it. But then she noticed Saul had taken something small from his sleeve and was fiddling with it. Because Saul had split some of his attention elsewhere, his running speed was clearly slower than before. Is he trying to push Billy to take the lead too? Angela was curious. She craned her neck to sneak a glance at Saul's hand. She saw a shiny gold coin in his hand, and Saul seemed to be scraping something across its surface. Just as Angela's curiosity piqued, wondering what Saul was doing at such a critical moment, the sound of the tide echoed again. This time, however, it wasn't just sound. Saul glanced up and finally saw what a blood-colored tide truly looked like. Until now, he had only heard it, never seen it. The ever-louder crashing had warned him that the tide was drawing near. Now countless crimson waves, like a tsunami, came pouring in from all directions, rushing through the streets toward the tower. The largest waves were over 10 meters high. No one knew where such massive tides had been hiding until now. Wherever the waves passed, windows shattered, buildings collapsed, and everything, furniture, vehicles, street debris, was swept up and carried forward. Within the red tide, Saul even spotted some luxurious carriages and exotic garments. Looks like the ordinary people who stumbled into this town didn't end well, though maybe they didn't just stumble in. After one glance, Saul looked down again and resumed fiddling with his ancient coin. To speed things up, he summoned little Algae from the back of his neck. It split into 4 and became 4 long legs, lifting Saul off the ground and sprinting at full speed. Little Algae was impressively agile. Carrying Saul like this, it ran even faster than he could on his own. To avoid getting caught by the lethal red tide, and to reach the clock tower as quickly as possible, the three each used their own tricks. Billy flew straight into the air. Flight was a staple auxiliary spell for any third-rank apprentice. But since flight was a second-tier spell, Saul couldn't learn it. He continued relying on Little Algae for speed. Little Algae lifted Saul higher, and its tendrils began crawling along the walls. On Angela's feet, 2 childlike soul projections appeared, hugging her calves as if lending her strength to run faster. But Angela wasn't built for speed. Even with the souls desperately helping her survive, she remained the slowest among them. She wasn't exactly slow, but compared to Saul and Billy, she was clearly lagging. Then, just as they were nearing the clock tower, red tides surged in from both sides of an upcoming crossroad, threatening to cut them off. At the critical moment, Billy swooped down, grabbed Angela and carried her into the air. Billy's speed was affected by Angela's weight, slowing him just slightly more than Saul, who had already safely passed the intersection. Billy's flight speed and altitude both took a hit, especially the altitude. He could no longer lift Angela high enough to fly over the cresting red tide. The waves were closing in from both sides. Angela squeezed her eyes shut in terror. But Billy didn't let her go. He pushed his magic to the limit, and at the last possible moment, managed to increase their speed just enough to slip through before the blood tides collided. Seeing this, Saul grew thoughtful, especially after noticing how naturally Angela accepted Billy's help. It was clearly not the first time he had saved her. But if Billy was helping Angela out of affection, then Saul might as well believe that Billy was a kind-hearted man with ugly face. Becoming used to being rescued was never a good thing. Even if she told herself she wanted to be independent, the body could still develop unconscious dependence. Then Saul noticed Angela's right leg trembling slightly. Though Billy had flown her over the tide, some splash had still struck her calf. Judging from her pained expression, Saul was now certain they absolutely couldn't touch the red tide. If one were truly swallowed by it, they'd probably become part of it. Chapter 270, Crying Face, Smiling Face. Not long after, the three of them, moving swiftly, followed the main road and arrived beneath the bell tower. Behind them, the crimson tide surged forward relentlessly. The bell continued to toll above their heads. Each toll sounded like a death knell. Yet even at such close range, they still couldn't see who was ringing the bell. Without hesitation, the three began to climb the wall of the bell tower. The blood tide crashed against the tower's base, sending up massive splashes. Angela was carried by Billy in one hand, the two flying upward together. Little Algie didn't need Saul to remind it. It lashed out at tendrils, hooked the spire of the bell tower and pulled them up. The two leapt, one after the other, into the top floor of the bell tower, which had open windows on all sides. Steadying himself, Saul looked back at the town streets and found it had become a vast red ocean. When the tide struck stone, it produced the same rushing sound he had heard earlier. Was I standing in blood the whole time? Saul turned back and saw that Billy had already approached the massive, swaying bell. Angela glanced around, hesitated for a moment, then stood at Saul's side. Whether she feared some hidden danger or Billy himself was unclear. Tusk! Billy suddenly clicked his tongue, then turned around. Amid the loud tolling, he shouted to Saul, "Did you say earlier you came in here with Machi Machi?" The moment Saul heard this, he immediately reacted. Eyebrows raised in disbelief, he quickly walked to Billy's side and bent down to look inside the bronze bell. HSS, he gasped in shock. The bronze bell was only half a person tall and as thick as a man's arms around, yet someone was crammed tightly inside. It was none other than Machi Machi, who had separated from Saul shortly after entering the town. After they parted, Machi Machi had never contacted Saul again, and Saul, facing constant danger, hadn't used that ancient coin either. Who would have thought their reunion would be like this? Machi Machi's long, thin body had been twisted cruelly like a pretzel and shoved into the bronze bell. His tilted head, hands, and feet were all squashed against the outer edge, while the rest of his body was crammed inside. "He's dead," Saul muttered in disbelief. Machi Machi was a third-rank apprentice who had guarded a wizard tower outpost for ages. How could he die so easily? But with his body twisted like this, could he possibly still be alive? "Almost, but not yet," Billy replied, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Machi Machi, who knew what he was thinking. At that moment, Machi Machi's stiff eyeballs suddenly twitched and with difficulty turned toward Saul. His lips parted slightly, and an ancient coin fell from his mouth. Clink! Metal clattered against stone, ringing out clearly. As the coin bounced on the ground, Saul noticed it looked just like the one Machi Machi had given him before, except the faces on both sides were crying instead of smiling. "Senior," Saul frowned at the coin. Just then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Billy move. A second later, a powerful magical surge came from behind. But the magic wasn't aimed at Machi Machi, it was aimed at him. Already on edge, Saul's soul armor spell activated instantly, blocking the oncoming mage hand at the last possible moment. The next moment, the mage hand shifted from a grab to a palm strike, slamming against the translucent barrier of soul armor. Mage hand and soul armor, both basic magic applications, collided with full force, releasing a burst of pressure. Saul staggered back 2 steps, nearly colliding with the bell that held Machi Machi. Just then the swaying bell abruptly stilled. The tolling stopped, but the sound of the tide outside grew louder. Anyone peeking out the window would see that, in mere moments, the red tide had flooded over most of the low buildings. Like a true world-ending deluge, it was about to engulf everything. But Saul had no time to worry about that. Though Billy had suddenly attacked, Saul hadn't been completely unprepared. Billy had used only a 0-tier spell, Mage Hand, which couldn't inflict much damage. All it did was push Saul closer to the bell. Suddenly, something fell from Saul's body too. Clink, his own ancient coin hit the ground, and collided with the one dropped by Machi Machi. The 2 coins seemed to attract each other, and the moment they met, their edges stuck together. At that instant, Saul, Billy, and even the distant Angela all fixed their eyes on the coins. Before their very eyes, the 2 coins suddenly flipped. Smiling faces became crying, crying became smiling. And then, Machi Machi, who'd been crammed inside the bell, suddenly dropped out. At the same time, Saul felt a powerful force trying to pull him into the bell. Angela's beautiful eyes darted back and forth between Saul and Machi Machi, stunned. She didn't know the exact function of the coins, but from their transformation and interaction, she could tell things weren't looking good for Saul. Her left hand twitched slightly, as if something or someone was trying to persuade her. But her gaze wavered, and in the end, she chose to merely watch, cold-eyed, not interfering in the clash. Saul's face contorted. The bell's pull, especially on his head, was growing stronger. He braced his legs against the floor, and little algae sprang into action, anchoring itself to the bell tower window frame. Saul resisted the pull with all his might, while keeping an eye on the others. Billy simply leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Angela remained uncertain, avoiding Saul's gaze. Meanwhile, the collapsed Machi Machi was slowly recovering. He lifted his head with difficulty and looked at Saul. "Sorry, to open the gate here, we needed a sacrifice." He didn't even glance at Saul's expression. He knew no words would improve the situation. Instead, he turned to Billy. "What are you waiting for?" But Billy still leaned against the wall. "I'm not going through, only to get double-crossed and become the next sacrifice." Still resisting the pull, Saul gritted his teeth. "You, too, knew the curse's nature from the start." Machi Machi was surprised Saul could still talk calmly. Scratching his head, he replied honestly, "Actually, I only figured out the rules after reaching the bell tower. Otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up trapped inside." Billy looked at the struggling Saul with a flicker of surprise and said, "I realized when I saw Machi Machi, but maybe I made my judgment too early." Another ambiguous line. But the still weakened Machi Machi suddenly sensed something. He turned towards Saul, just in time to see him relax. Hands in his pockets, Saul stood up casually and tilted his head at him, eyes gleaming with icy detachment. "Forgot to mention, I'm not just good with souls, I'm especially skilled at analyzing runes." In an instant, Machi Machi felt a massive force pulling down from above. Still weak and mentally drained, he could only stare blankly upward. and saw the massive bell rushing toward him. His final thought, just before being sucked back into the bell, was a glimpse of the two ancient coins on the ground. The coin that belonged to him had somehow turned back into a crying face. Chapter 271, Human Bell. Machi Machi was once again sucked into the waist-high bronze bell, and this time his head went in first, powerless to resist. He was nearly 2 meters tall, thin and lanky. When his head rammed into the inside of the bell, more than half of his body was still hanging outside. Bang! A deafening crash echoed from within the bell, making one wonder if Machi Machi's skull had cracked the bell. However, a human head is still not as hard as a bronze bell. His limbs twitched a few more times, then stilled completely. Thick, dark red blood oozed from within, trickling down his black formal suit and dripping, bit by bit, onto the floor. As luck would have it, a breeze passed through the open window of the bell tower. Though Machi Machi wasn't light, he was swayed easily by this gentle wind. His head remained hidden inside the bell, while his body began to sway from side to side, his limbs dangling rhythmically in midair. As his body struck the rim of the bell, dong dong dong, he had become the clapper of the bell. The melodious sound rang out across the entirety of Grind Sale Town, and it was distinctly different from the muffled tones earlier. Could it be because the bell isn't stuffed full of junk this time? Saul bent down and picked up the two ancient coins, slipping them casually into his pocket. These old coins were quite something. If you figured them out, they made for a powerful life-saving tool, a real game-changer. While picking them up, Saul's right hand remained tucked in his coat pocket. He had no choice. His hand was clutching a second-tier spell scroll in there. If Billy dared make a move again, he might just be able to strike back. Billy, who was one level above him, still hadn't made his stance clear, and Angela was a fair-weather ally at best. Until things truly spiraled, Saul didn't want to provoke Billy. But that didn't mean he'd forgive and forget. Oh no, he'd written that grudge down in ink. Now that we have our sacrifice, Saul turned to look at Billy and Angela. Can you tell me how we get out of here? While Saul was picking up the coins, both Billy and Angela had been watching his hands closely, clearly interested in the spell tool that could deflect a lethal strike. But after that eerie and unexpected reversal from Saul, they were a bit wary now. Especially Angela. She'd always known Saul was fast at learning runes, but she hadn't realized he could alter them too. And that was one of the most advanced techniques in rune magic. What she didn't know was that Billy was even more shocked, though his naturally gloomy expression masked any visible reaction. In Billy's understanding, modifying the effects of a spell item, especially an ancient one, was an extremely complex task. Yet, if he remembered correctly, Saul had only pulled out the ancient coin moments earlier, while they were still walking here. And in just a few minutes, he had successfully performed a modification. Adding to that, Saul had completed 2 physical transformations in less than 3 years. Suddenly, the rumor that Saul had been chosen as a disciple purely for his exceptional mental aptitude seemed off. If that's all the Tower Master saw in him, then Billy could only think bitterly, "Tower Master, you were wrong." Right now, he kind of regretted helping Machi Machi earlier. In hindsight, Saul looked far more like a worthwhile investment. So he didn't try to snatch the coin from Saul's hand, letting him keep it instead. But Saul might not take that as a peace offering. In the span of a few heartbeats, Billy's mind raced through dozens of scenarios. And yet his face remained blank as ever. "The theory about the sacrifice," he began, "is also tied to what I mentioned earlier, the world-destroying black tide." From within the bell came a series of faint tolls, while outside, the sound of waves remained ever-present. Some curses can't be stopped without enough life offered up first. Like with the world-destroying black tide, Even if someone finds a ship, they need to fuel it with lives to get it going. So when I saw Machi Machi, I realized that Bronze Bell was the key to activating it. And that's why you pushed me out as a substitute for Machi Machi. Billy hesitated. Angela, terrified they might start fighting again, didn't even dare breathe too loudly. Finally, Billy admitted it. At the time, it seemed Machi Machi would be more useful for escaping the town, but you've since proven me wrong. He could admit fault without batting an eye. Saul hadn't expected Billy to be that kind of man, so shamelessly straightforward. He merely let out a cold laugh and pushed the emotion deep down. If he hadn't received that diary warning on the way here, "You're laughing too early. You'll be crying soon enough," he wouldn't have suspected the coin Machi Machi gave him was rigged. So back on the road, he kicked his mental processing into high gear. With the help of the diary, he rapidly rewrote the resonance relationship embedded in the ancient coin. Now, with a single burst of mental energy, he could sever the link between the coin in his hand and its twin. That was how he'd managed to send Machi Machi back at the last second. He hadn't broken the link immediately so he could play weak. If Billy or Angela tried to ambush him at that moment, they'd walk right into his trap. And if he could take down even one of them, he wouldn't be stuck in a 1v3 situation. In a one-on-one, Saul might not beat Billy outright, but if it came down to survival, Saul liked his odds. "How much longer are we waiting?" Angela asked softly. She had no idea she'd already died once in someone else's plan. "The sea of blood is almost up to the windows. How are we getting out?" Saul looked outside and saw that the crimson tide had indeed risen again. Only a few rooftops remained above the waterline. Broken goods floated chaotically atop the blood-red sea. "This really looks like the end of the world," Saul murmured. "Heh, this isn't the end of the world," a new voice said, "just the end of mine." Suddenly, a fourth voice rang out in the bell tower. A young girl had appeared out of nowhere, sitting atop the swaying bell clapper. She gripped the iron chain suspending the bell with one hand and braced herself against the slanted roof with the other, swinging like she was on a bloody corpse-made swing. She wasn't very old, and while she could only be called cute at best, her eyes shimmered with star-like brilliance, giving her an air of mystery. At the exact moment she appeared, the blood sea outside surged into a frenzy. Crashing waves slammed against the bell tower walls, sending bloody spray flying dangerously close to the open windows. Everyone quickly backed away. Penny ignored the blood spray and gently patted the giant bell beneath her. With a heavy sigh, she said, "I told you, the first one to sniff out the truth behind all this was going to be the sacrifice. But you didn't listen. You just had to wait until Saul got here so you could bully him. And now look at you, ended up as the sacrifice anyway." "Penny," Saul called out, staring at the girl trying to confirm her identity. Penny turned to him with a flawless smile. "We meet again, Saul." Angela's eyes widened slightly. Seeing that Saul recognized the girl, she clenched her left hand, fingers trembling. "Who are you really?" Saul narrowed his eyes. Penny still wasn't giving off the aura of a soul. The bell swung wider. As it reached its peak, the girl looked down and locked eyes with Saul. "I'm Penny," she said. As she swung backward again, her voice became faint beneath the bell's tolls. "I've been Penny for many, many years." Many years. If something had been wrong with Penny for that long, then whose eye had he taken away back then? He was about to ask when he saw the girl press a finger to her lips, then twirl a lock of hair around her finger. Saul swallowed all his questions about the nightmare butterfly. Just then, Angela's voice came through via a whisper spell. "Saul, if you know her, could you ask her to let us go?" Before Saul could respond, Penny, now swinging forward again, stared down at Angela with a cool, assessing look. "No can do, Tilda." She had heard their whisper spell. Everyone's faces changed. They exchanged glances, but didn't dare use spell messaging again. Penny didn't explain how she'd done it. She swung back, and what she said next made all their brows furrow. This little town has already become a cage with no exit. Chapter 272, 2 out of 3. It's impossible, Billy said darkly. There's no such thing as a curse that guarantees death. If there were, it would only exist in stories. Penny once again swung forward and looked at Billy, seemingly intrigued. Yes, I was lying to you, she giggled, appearing quite pleased with the tense looks on their faces just moments ago. Aren't you trapped here just like us? Angela couldn't help but step forward. She'd been watching the tide outside. It was rising fast, nearly level with the windowsill. She didn't want to waste any more time chatting with this enigmatic Penny. The sacrifices are already in place. If you tell us how to escape, we might be able to help you get out too. You're lying. Penny puffed her cheeks and deliberately leaned on her arm, causing the great bell to sway in a new direction. The long, rhythmic swinging resumed, and the tip of Machi Machi's shoe nearly struck Angela. She quickly staggered back. Penny burst into laughter, head thrown back like a gleeful child. Angela bit her lip in anger, on the verge of unleashing the soul inside her to teach Penny a lesson. But Saul raised a hand to stop her. He stepped forward and grabbed Machi Machi's swinging calf midair, halting the great bell's movement completely. Penny, who was hanging from the bell, stopped as well, yet her body didn't sway, as though inertia didn't apply to her at all. You didn't appear out of nowhere just to mess with us. Time's running out. Say what you want or plan to do fast. Looking down from above, Penny's playful smile finally faded. Is Brother Saul really that eager to leave Penny behind? This might be the last time we ever meet. Saul simply stared at her. Under his steady gaze, Penny finally gave in. Fine, she sighed, leaping off the bell and landing lightly on Saul's arm. His arm didn't so much as flex, yet it held her weight with ease. She landed on him like a butterfly landing softly on a flower. Just ignite the soul flame of the sacrifice, and the gate of the town will open for a brief time. She had barely finished her sentence when Billy suddenly moved. A black flame burst from his fingertip. With a flick of his arm, it landed on Machi Machi. It was as if the flame fell onto an oil-soaked rag. Machi Machi ignited instantly. His whole body went up in flames. Limbs that had hung limp began to tremble violently. Saul heard a sharp, agonized wail. It was the sound of Machi Machi's soul crying out. Saul's eyes flicked toward Billy, whose expression remained unmoved. This man had just risked himself to try and save Machi Machi, yet the moment he learned that escaping required sacrificing him, he'd been the first to act. The flames consuming Machi Machi's body spread to the great bell, and from there to the roof of the clock tower. Everything, whether flammable or not, began to burn. Firelight pierced through the tower's windows, casting golden light onto the blood-colored ocean outside. The three people inside the clock tower quickly cast protective spells around themselves, shielding from the heat and flames. And then Saul asked. Billy's flames were unusual. Machi Machi's corpse turned to ash in no time. The copper bell began to melt and drip. But the iron chain suspending the bell merely caught fire. It didn't melt or break. Penny's expression, however, grew worse. She looked more unstable by the second. Then we wait for the cage to appear, which will point out where the door is, she said. Her body swayed as she jumped off Saul's arm and stumbled. She hit the ground hard, unable to stay on her feet. Saul watched her reaction closely. Billy, meanwhile, was focused on the deformed, unrecognizable bell. Clang! Finally, the melted copper bell dropped to the floor. The fire scattered like rats, fleeing in every direction. Some hit the apprentices, protective shields, and fizzled out with a hiss. When the bell fell, it revealed something still hanging from the chain below. It was a crystal orb, filled with a red liquid. The liquid had already filled most of the orb and was still rising. It looked like a miniature version of Grindsail Town. Is this the source of the curse? Billy stared at the orb, visibly tempted. But this was also the curse's most potent moment. Even a true wizard might not be able to take that orb now. Suddenly, a red light appeared inside the orb. It projected two beams of light onto the orb's surface, forming two tiny red dots. Then the beams pierced through the orb and continued across the tower, out the window, and into the churning blood sea. Saul followed the direction of the beams. They pointed straight at the town's two gates. The doors are open now, but only for 3 minutes. Go, Billy barked. More experienced than the others, he immediately flew up, grabbing Angela to leave. But before they could take off, Penny spoke in a chilly voice. This escape path has a restriction. Only 2 people can use it. She might have been lying, but the atmosphere inside the clock tower shifted instantly. Billy and Saul locked eyes. Sparks practically flew between them. Saul knew that if it came down to a direct fight, he probably wouldn't win against Billy, and Angela clearly mattered to him. But Saul had no intention of giving up his chance to escape. If Billy really does come after me, Saul thought, watching Angela from the corner of his eye, his fingertips began turning transparent. Angela didn't need a warning to realize Saul would target her. She hastily maintained her defensive spells and backed away, moving behind Billy to use his body as a shield. Get in, Billy said suddenly, cracking open his protective barrier. Angela's eyes lit up. She knew that meant he was going to protect her. A third-rank apprentice's barrier was far better than hers. She didn't hesitate. She slipped inside. Angela glanced smugly at Saul. So what if you're talented? Can you beat someone who's about to become a full-fledged wizard? Her gloating was cut short by a sharp pain in her abdomen. Huh? She gasped in disbelief, staring at Billy's hand buried in her stomach. Before she could react, he pulled his hand out. He was holding a small, pale gray lump, solid, rough, and irregular like an unremarkable rock. Pulled it a bit early, Billy said, but it should be able to reproduce on its own now. He tucked it away with a quick flash. Saul barely saw it. Then he shoved the trembling, pain-racked Angela out of his shield and let her collapse in agony. Why? She groaned, unable to even lift her head. Billy ignored her completely. He looked at Saul with a blank expression and said, "No need to be tense. Now it's just the 2 of us." A wave surged through the window. Blood tide had risen to their level. Overhead, the crystal orb began to flicker. Saul hadn't been surprised by Billy's ruthlessness, but he hadn't expected him to act at such a critical moment. Was that an apology for attacking me earlier while trying to save Machi Machi? Saul wondered. Billy gave Saul a small nod, then turned and stepped onto the windowsill. The man made decisions about gain and loss without the slightest hesitation. Saul knew now wasn't the time to settle scores. He jumped up onto the other window. But the moment he saw where the gate lay, he froze. Though the red beams from the orb pointed toward the town's 2 gates, those gates had long since been submerged. To follow the beams, they would have to dive beneath the surface. And that crimson tide was the curse's most lethal power. After all that running and scheming, are we really going to have to dive straight into the blood sea to escape? Chapter 273, Bluff. Just then, the red beam of light overhead flickered. Billy didn't hesitate anymore. In a flash, he shot forward, seemingly deciding to charge straight through the blood tide. However, Saul noticed that he was flying along the red line above the water's surface. He must have planned to reach the vicinity of the city gate first, then make a quick dash through the blood sea to minimize contact with it. Saul couldn't fly. Although little Algie could carry him, The rising water level meant that almost no buildings nearby remained unsubmerged. If he wanted to cross, he'd have to swim for part of the way, but his magic might not last long under the constant attack of the curse. The floating debris on the water was all broken and small, not enough to support his weight. The rooftop above was still burning, and chunks of broken tiles and stones fell into the sea of blood, sending up plumes of black smoke. The red guiding light flashed again, as if the open gate truly was about to shut. Gritting his teeth, Saul was just about to leap out when suddenly, the diary flew out once more. September 1, year 316 of the lunar calendar. What is the truest lie in this world? When you finally struggle your way through the gate of hope, only to realize that freedom is so fleeting. Turns out the Crimson Sea isn't letting you leave. It's showing you hope, only so that you can fully understand despair. When your corpse floats in the sea of blood, staring up at the crimson sky and the dancing butterflies, perhaps only then, in that serenity, will you taste what death feels like. Bitter, isn't it? Saul pulled his foot back, looked toward the rapidly departing Billy, and then silently turned to Penny. Penny gazed back at him with those bright, starry eyes, as clean and pure as a real child. Seeing him stop, she tilted her head and said, "Brother Saul, why aren't you going? The light about to vanish." When Saul didn't move, Penny got up and walked over, seemingly trying to take his hand, but Saul evaded her. "Are you staying to keep me company, Brother Saul? That's so sweet of you." More waves surged in through the windows. Saul knew he didn't have much time left. He had to find out from Penny the real way to leave the town, fast. The diary hadn't said entering the town meant certain death, so there had to be a way out. What's the real method to leave this town? Did you lie just to bury us with you, or do you simply want to watch supposedly strong wizard apprentices collapse in despair? Little nightmare butterfly. Penny's outstretched hand froze in midair. For a moment, the only sound in the clock tower was the crackle of burning wood. Angela, lying weakly on the floor, reached out her left hand toward Saul, as if begging for help. But Saul, focused on Penny, didn't notice her. Penny, however, did and marched over in a huff, stepping hard on Angela's outstretched hand. "Didn't you see I was talking to Brother Saul? What are you dead people trying to interrupt?" Saul turned and looked at the frail Angela, saying nothing. When Billy had pulled that gray stone from Angela's body and tossed her aside, everyone knew she was done for. Only she still clung to false hope. At that moment, the red light above them was completely extinguished. But the diary didn't issue any crisis warnings. Saul, whose heart had just seized up in panic, felt reassured and managed to maintain his calm. Penny, looking disappointed that Saul hadn't panicked, pouted and asked, "How did you figure it out?" Of course, Saul wasn't going to say it was because the diary mentioned butterflies and because he'd gotten the cocoon from her. He'd only been bluffing. Seeing him stay silent, Penny understood he didn't want to explain. "Fine, I did lie to you. I can't get out myself. Why would I kindly show you the way? Do I look like some kind of good person?" At that moment, Angela stopped moving entirely. Her gaze blank, she lay motionless. But then her magic flared. An intense burst of power repelled the encroaching blood waves from the tower's top level for a moment. At the same time, the blast of power also extinguished the flames above, revealing the scorched roof. A moment later, Saul narrowed his eyes and saw Angela's soul. As a student specializing in dark magic, Angela's soul was shockingly fragile, covered in tiny cracks like a shattered piece of glass. Penny apparently had the ability to see soul too. Her starry eyes sparkled as she leaned soul and gently blew at Angela's soul like she was blowing out a candle. Whoosh! Angela's fragile soul instantly scattered into ash, vanishing without a trace. What did Billy plant in her body? Saul frowned. It seemed fine while she was alive, but everything erupted after her death. He studies toxic magic. Did he develop a new poison that can harm the soul? Chilled by the thought, Saul resolved to ask Kelly about Billy in detail once he got back. So boring, Penny grumbled, rubbing her face irritably as Saul continued to wait for her answer. This cursed town is my prison. You saw that crystal ball, right? I'm like someone trapped inside it. It looks like there are exits everywhere, but I just can't get out. She curled up on the ground, looking as though she might cry. Drop the act. If you really don't want to communicate, maybe I can change someone to communicate with. I think the person who trapped you here should be willing to cooperate with me to capture you, right? Penny bit her lower lip and suddenly shot to her feet. He doesn't need your help, she snapped, her smile vanishing. I'm going to die completely. I don't even know why that guy just cursed me and kept sending people in to die with me. But no matter what, I'm dying. So why should I care about you? For the cocoon you gave me, don't you care about your own child? Saul had no idea whether the cocoon really came from her, but that didn't stop him from bluffing. Penny scoffed, who cares about a dead egg? I gave it to you to play with. It's not dead. What? I took it back to the wizard tower, and it gave me plenty of trouble. I had to dig it out and seal it up, afraid it might hatch the next day. Thankfully, it was an unhatched cocoon. If it had been a fully grown nightmare butterfly, he wouldn't have stood a chance. The diary had warned Saul. If the cocoon wasn't sealed, it was only a matter of time before it hatched. Judging by Penny's reaction, she hadn't known it was still alive. Most creatures have a strong instinct to reproduce. Saul wasn't sure if nightmare butterflies were the same, since many beings in the wizarding world defied typical logic. Living or non-living, survival and continuation came first. Still, this nightmare butterfly was trapped and constantly going on about dying. If she wasn't lying, then a living cocoon should mean a lot to her. Penny's silver eyes locked onto Saul. I don't believe you. Wizards are the best liars. I want to see it for myself. Behind her, 2 pairs of silver butterfly wings unfurled. The moment Saul saw those wings, he knew she really was dying. They were dull in color, the edges frayed with deep gashes. There were gruesome puncture wounds across the middle of the scales. Butterfly wings don't bleed, so all the damage was plainly visible. The nightmare butterfly was seriously, thoroughly injured. Like a withered yellow leaf, clinging to the tip of a tree branch in the dead of winter. Chapter 274, Brother and Sister. Penny's massive butterfly wings were now covered in wounds. Her little face was tightly scrunched as she struggled to flap them once. Saul was momentarily dazed, as if he'd nodded off during a bout of exhaustion, only to jolt awake a second later. Could the nightmare butterfly see into a person's memories? He instantly focused his mental power, growing tense. I saw it. It really came back to life, Penny muttered, somewhat dazed. Why is there a sign of the death cocoon starting to hatch on your body? That's none of your concern. In truth, Saul had no idea either, but are you still planning to die here with me? If I don't make it back, your child will fall into someone else's hands, and they won't know how to hatch a nightmare butterfly. No need to say more, I believe you. Penny looked at Saul, who no longer acted like a child. I'll open the real exit for you, but be careful of the wizard waiting outside. I don't know what he wants, but I know for sure he's no good man. Penny then asked, after entering the town, were you touched by the red water at all? Saul thought carefully and then shook his head with certainty. That's even better, Penny smiled. I won't have to waste strength removing the curse clinging to you. That'll save me a bit of energy. Her voice gradually faded, as if she were hesitating. I originally planned to die here with him. Him? Saul's mind immediately conjured up the image of that slightly silly, hot-tempered man. You mean Ada? Yes, my brother. Penny's mental state seemed off. I've been in this body for far too long. She sighed and suddenly walked to the window. The red sea of blood immediately surged like wailing soul, reaching out hands toward Penny, trying to drag her into the waters. But Penny beat her wings and took off, shaking off the bloodied limbs. She barely maintained her balance in midair and said to Saul, "Wait here a moment." As soon as she spoke, her figure vanished. A silver butterfly appeared in her place, flapped its tattered wings a few times, then vanished in a flash, flying off into the distance at incredible speed. "My lord!" Just as Saul was staring after Penny's disappearance, a voice suddenly called out from behind him. He turned around and saw a transparent hand crawling across the ground like a spider. The hand was slender with a small frame. It clearly belonged to a woman. "My lord," the voice came from the disembodied limb, "please take me with you as well. I am willing to become your servant and obey your every command." "You're the wraith that was hiding in Angela's left hand." "Yes, my lord, but I never intended you any disrespect. I even urged Angela to help you, but she was too timid to act." Saul wasn't particularly interested in this fragment of a wraith and planned to feed it to the diary. Then suddenly, something occurred to him. Angela had never left the wizard tower, so where had this wraith come from? Was it cargo brought back by other apprentices, or a byproduct of the tower itself? Did you come from the interlayer? Saul decided to test it. At the mention of the word interlayer, the hand clearly trembled, then flopped to the ground in a full prostration. "Why, yes, my lord. I came from inside the bronze gate. During an accident, my arm was severed and I escaped. I've been hiding in the candle ducts ever since. Eventually, I crawled out through Mentor Kaz's lab trash can and finally attached myself to Angela nearby." The wraith hand had intended to win Saul's sympathy with a tragic tale, but just then, the blood tide began to pour in through the window, nearing the limb. Alarmed, it quickened its speech and blurted everything out in one go. It actually came from inside the bronze gate. Saul's interest was piqued. Knowing time was short, he stopped questioning and reached out toward the wraith hand. "Come here." The hand was overjoyed and jumped with its fingers in delight. "My lord, I will stay obediently in your arm. You can command me however you wish." Stay in his arm to serve his needs. A strange thought suddenly popped into Saul's head and he twitched his mouth. "No need, I've got a better place for you." As he spoke, the diary unfolded on its own, responding to his will and devoured the wraith hand. But unexpectedly, the diary didn't give the hand its own black page. Instead, it absorbed it into a previously incomplete black page, only 2/3 full before. In Saul's eyes, the damaged page rapidly restored itself and became a full black page. What the? Did this hand become part of that lunatic? Just as he finished stowing away the wraith hand, Saul heard someone approaching. He quickly turned and was shocked to see a palm-sized silver butterfly tugging at an old man's collar with its tiny feelers. She flew with difficulty, nearly dropping the man into the blood sea several times. Yet she persisted, eventually managing to hurl the man into the clock tower, right into Saul's arms. Saul caught him, flipped him over, and was stunned. The mad old man. By now, the nightmare butterfly Penny was extremely weak, unable even to maintain her human form. The blood tide had flooded into the room and was now flowing toward the center. It quickly reached Angela's corpse, hungrily devouring it. And it was Angela's body that had bought Saul a few precious minutes. "I'll open the gate now. Please take my brother with you." "Brother?" Saul was shocked. He looked at the madman and suddenly understood. "He's Ada." "Yes." "Then the Ada I met before was merely someone I implanted with my brother's memories," Penny said casually. "Ada, my brother took care of me for far too long. The radiation he suffered already exceeded normal limits, But to escape that wizard's pursuit, I had to stay inside Penny's body and follow him. Once I regained some power, I found someone else to take his place, just kept my brother nearby. But his mental state kept deteriorating. He always returned to the night our village was destroyed, the night he left you behind. So the village the old madman kept muttering about being destroyed by barbarians was actually Saul's original home. Though Saul hadn't lived through that painful night, the realization left him heavy-hearted. Please take him out of here. I'll erase his most painful memories. You don't need to care for him, just give him some money. Enough to live a quiet life in an ordinary town. The butterfly hovered weakly in the air, facing Saul, though her gaze never left the old man. This madman, no, Ada, was truly the village's only survivor. Everyone he thought of as his sister, his fellow villagers, had long perished in distant corners, rotting away. Sure enough, you really can't stay too long in someone else's body, feelings like this. How did they even appear in me? I must have been corrupted. Saul heard Penny mutter softly. By now, having finished devouring Angela, the blood tide surged once more toward the room's center. Knowing she had no time left, Penny suddenly beat her wings and turned, charging with all her strength at the crystal sphere above. Ha, Kismet, even though you've captured me for so long and chased me for so many years, I still won't let you win. The seemingly indestructible crystal sphere shattered with a single strike from the frail butterfly, scattering fragments in all directions. As it shattered, the silver butterfly also broke apart like crystal, fragment by fragment. The key to the cursed city's only escape route turned out to be Penny's very life. In that brief instant, Saul thought he saw a faint, lovely girl smiling at him from across the room. Ridiculous fate, a power to peer into the past, and it ends up in the hands of a mere apprentice who hasn't even become a true wizard. Once you leave, run. Don't let Kismet catch you. Don't ever mention anything about me. Otherwise, you'll be the shortest-serving history watcher in history. Chapter 275. Escape from the town. After Penny's final instruction, her dreamlike figure shimmered and transformed into a circular archway of light. Saul knew at once this was the only way out. He hoisted the old madman onto his back, suppressed the inexpressible sorrow in his heart, and sprinted toward the archway. The moment Saul leapt through it, a blinding light shot directly into his eyes. It burned painfully, forcing tears to stream down his cheeks. And just as Saul left the clock tower, the blood tide abandoned Angela's corpse and surged forth again, flooding the room. As he passed through the portal, Saul seemed to hear a voice faintly calling out twice, "Brother." The next step he took landed him squarely on cracked, parched earth. When he looked up, he found himself in the middle of a barren wilderness. The horizon was beginning to pale with light. Dawn had arrived. Just as Saul was wondering how to take care of the old madman, a familiar harp melody drifted from behind him. He turned around. There, reclining beneath a sparse, scraggly tree, was Victor. No, Kismet. Damn, it walked right into him. Saul's heart clenched. Before sending him out, Penny had specifically warned him to avoid being caught by Kismet. She had even sent him far from Grind Sail Town to make his escape easier. But she clearly hadn't expected to drop Saul directly into the enemy's hands. The brief melody came to a close, and before the final note vanished, Kismet sang a haunting coda, filled with winding turns and wistful flourishes. In dreams, a farewell for now. He set down his harp and tilted his head toward Saul, his eyes narrowing with a smile that carried a vague, unreadable sorrow. Congratulations, master, you've obtained the past. Saul's heartbeat quickened. He had a feeling Kismet was acting again. In fact, before Penny had sent Saul out, 2 others had arrived at the formation of graves outside Grind Sail Town, seemingly intent on entering. One of them wore an outrageously sexy maid outfit, yet moved with the grace and dignity of a noble princess. Behind her trailed a pale-faced apprentice wizard. He was clearly trying not to stare at the maid's long, shapely legs, but every time he accidentally glanced in that direction, his face would twitch painfully, and he'd wrench his gaze away. Wright followed behind the maid, holding a small bundle in his arms. That maid was a puppet he'd brought back to the wizard tower. The soul within had once been a high-ranking member of the Land Drifters, but after being incinerated by Lady Yura's attack, that soul had been reduced to ashes. All the goods sent by the Land Drifters had naturally been confiscated. After all, they had violated the rules first by sending a spy into the tower. After the battle, Lady Yura, who moved like a living shadow, inexplicably chose to enter the puppet's body herself. She then set off with Wright, strolling leisurely back as though on a spring outing. Every time Wright remembered that the soul inside the puppet was the tower master's wife, his heart would flutter with excitement. But the very next second, the reminder would make his liver tremble with fear. So his eyes spasmed like they were having seizures, darting about restlessly. "This town feels odd," Yura murmured, pressing a delicate finger against her chin. "Yeah, looks like a curse source is being cultivated here." Wright finally steadied his thoughts when it came to business. "But it's strange. Why would there be a curse source in a place like this?" "I doubt it's a true curse source," Yura said, gazing into the town. Grindsail Town was eerily silent. No voices, no insects or birds, no smoke rising from chimneys. But for a place nurturing a curse, this wasn't exactly out of the ordinary. Then Yura's nostrils flared slightly. A heavy, cloying scent of blood seemed to hang in the air. "Let's go take a look, don't go in yet." The two approached the gates of Grindsail Town. Yura placed a hand lightly on the door, as if to probe the situation inside. But the moment her hand made contact, she jerked it back as if burned. "What's wrong, my lady?" Wright asked quickly. "I hear the sea." "Huh." Just as Wright was about to see what she meant by a sea in the desert, the town gate creaked open slightly. And then, countless streams of blood surged toward the opening. But when they reached half a meter outside the gate, they halted, as though solidified, stuck like jelly. "Weird, it's just blood, isn't it? Why won't it flow out? Someone must be controlling it," Wright thought, mentally firing off a barrage of questions. Just then, Yura grabbed Wright's shoulder and pulled him back 5 or 6 steps. "Something coming." As soon as they stopped, Wright saw a shadowy figure staggering toward them through the blood. He immediately went on alert. Must be someone trying to escape after going in earlier. But that cursed domain clearly is easy to leave. And this blood carries powerful corruption. He might not make it even if he escapes. Just as Yura was preparing to watch the show, she suddenly fell silent, eyes locked on the approaching lucky survivor. "That silhouette looks familiar," Wright said, beginning to recognize the figure too. At last the shadow broke through the wall of blood. His face emerged before them. "Billy," Wright gasped. Billy looked terrible, utterly wretched. He had made it halfway through the blood curtain, but the crimson sea clung to his skin like glue, stretching and distorting every time he tried to break free, until finally it snapped with a wet pop, accompanied by a furious screech. Billy was a powerful third-rank apprentice, among the most promising candidates for becoming a true wizard. The moment he'd entered the blood sea, he'd realized Penny had lied to him. Not that it surprised him much. He had studied curses deeply for his poison research, even performed countless live experiments, including on himself. So he understood. The red beam did point to the exit. The only real problem was the blood sea, the curse's most lethal weapon. If he could endure it, he could escape. But when he finally pushed open the gate, Billy realized he had underestimated not the sea's lethality, but its stickiness. The farther he ran, the harder it pulled him back. Worse still, he'd already exhausted every last drop of magic and used up all his protective scrolls. Gha, he groaned, skin tearing with every step. Yet even so, after making it 3 or 4 meters beyond the gate, his body was starting to be dragged back again. One slip and it was over. He lifted his head, his face grotesquely twisted. Then his eyes lit up, 2 people. Right and the puppet. Especially the puppet. He recognized the soul inside instantly. "Help me." That flicker of hope gave him a burst of strength. He thrust out a bloodied arm, reaching toward the puppet. "Don't touch me," Yura snapped, frowning. At the sound of her voice, Billy actually flinched and drew back his hand. But his bloodshot eyes remained locked on her. "Please save me." His lips were mangled, every word was a struggle. Yura looked like she was going to scold him again, but seeing him obey her command to not touch her, her expression turned curious. Her eyes lingered on the threads of cursed blood clinging to him. "You know I'm not a second rank anymore," she said lightly. "I can't touch that stuff. Please save gray matter with me." Billy could barely speak. He knew Yura was his only hope now, and he prayed that he was still of some use to her. Yura brushed a lock of hair from her chest and smiled. "I'm no Gorsa, I can't cleanse a curse, but I can transfer it." The moment she said that, Wright, who had just been enjoying the show, broke into a cold sweat. Without another word, he turned and flew off into the distance. Chapter 276, Make Him Cross-Dress. However, Wright didn't make it far before being caught. Without even turning her head, Yura flicked her wrist in the direction of Wright's escape. A black shadow shot out from her palm and quickly coiled around his waist. She ignored his pleas for mercy and slammed him violently into the ground. Then Yura extended her other hand, summoning another shadow that first hovered above Billy's head, then swept around his body through the air without making direct contact. It stopped at his side. With a flick of her fingers, she extracted a twisted red silhouette from Billy's body. Yura didn't dare touch the figure directly. She suspended it in the air and swiftly transferred it into Wright's chest. Wright, already thrashing in fear, immediately went into a full-blown panic. He opened his mouth to scream for help, but Yura slapped him hard, sending him flying toward the gates of Grind Sail Town. In the next moment, the blood threads that had once entangled Billy changed targets. Countless strands wrapped around Wright instead, like the women who clung to him in life, their fingers digging into him as if refusing to let him leave. Wright's terrified, despair-filled eyes widened as he watched Billy, now free from the threads, standing behind Yura. There was nothing he could do as he was dragged into the town. Bang! The town gate slammed shut the next second. Only the sound of waves crashing against the rocks remained. Perhaps Wright never expected that the man who always prided himself on reading the situation and maneuvering smoothly between factions would meet his end here, in an unremarkable place, for a reason no one would ever know, becoming someone else's scapegoat. As Yura watched the gates close, sealing Wright's fate, she turned to Billy and held out her hand. "Where is it?" Billy produced the gray stone he had extracted from Angela's body and carefully placed it in the puppet's hand. "Please be cautious, don't probe it with mental power." You actually figured it out. Even Yura, as composed as she was, had to offer rare praise. But after returning the gray substance to Billy, she frowned and warned him. "You're in charge of such an important experiment, yet you were so reckless. How could you enter a cursed domain without proper caution? You should take fewer risks in the future." Billy, having just escaped death, lowered his eyes, expression unmoved. "So long as I survive, that's enough. If I weren't willing to take risks, none of you would have chosen to work with me." Yura scoffed. "Quite the tough, aren't you?" Billy said nothing more. At that moment, The town before them gave off a sharp cracking sound. It was as if the entire town had turned into a glass bottle and shattered. The blast of force made both Yura and Billy involuntarily close their eyes. It felt like countless glass shards were flying at their faces. But when the sound faded and they opened their eyes again, there were no shards anywhere in sight. Still confused, they turned back to Grindsail Town, only to find that the town's walls, houses, and trees had all turned blood red. Yura sneered coldly. Looks like from now on Grindsail Town needs a new name, Bloodsail Town. It was just a passing comment. Yura felt no sorrow for the tragedy that had unfolded in the town. She didn't even seem too concerned about what Billy had experienced inside. Turning to him, she asked if he wanted to return to the Wizard Tower together. Billy, however, shook his head. He was battered and badly injured. He needed to find a safe place to recover before returning to the Wizard Tower. The Wizard Tower isn't safe, Yura asked with an ambiguous smile. Billy responded only with a silent bow, then flew off. Even when you've just regained a bit of magic, you still can't wait to leave. Yura rolled her eyes with flair and turned to leave. Suddenly, a black shadow swept across the sky and descended rapidly. It was a giant bird, and standing atop it was a valiant woman warrior. Kira had received word in Borderfall City and arrived the very next morning to collect someone. She had no intention of showing the visiting princess any particular courtesy. Her plan was to simply throw the woman onto the bird and carry her straight back to Borderfall City. After all, Kema and Kinas were bound to go to war eventually. Sending a princess over was little more than delivering a decorative flower vase. Although Kira wouldn't normally lay hands on the princess due to her status, she also had no intention of letting the woman do as she pleased. What Kira didn't expect, however, was to find the town before her died entirely in blood when she arrived. There wasn't a single living soul in sight. But outside the town, she spotted a figure who shouldn't have been there. Kira jumped off the giant bird from more than 10 meters in the air. She didn't soften her landing. Her feet slammed into the ground, leaving deep cracks and indentations. Dust burst up, covering the puppet's body. Yura looked at Kira with a complicated expression. As the dust settled, she slowly spoke, "Long time no see, sister." But Kira raised her chin and replied, "Who's your sister? Don't go calling me that, you're fake." The puppet's face tightened instantly, the mechanism at her jaw creaking ominously. "Was this town you're doing?" Yura was silent for a few seconds, then finally said, "No, I was just passing through." Kira glanced back at Grindsail Town, then snapped her fingers toward the sky. This cursed domain was crafted by at least a second-tier true wizard. Someone like you couldn't possibly do it. Leaving that scornful remark hanging in the air, Kira leapt back onto the bird, not even bothering to say goodbye as she flew off. Yura was left standing there furious, her fists clenched tight. Crack! One of her fingers broke off and fell to the ground. A few kilometers outside of Grindsail Town, in the barren desert, Kismet concluded his performance with a bow towards Saul. "Congratulations, Master, you've obtained the past." Saul didn't move recklessly. After all, he was facing a second-tier true wizard. He glanced at the mad old man in his arms, and though the man showed no signs of waking, Saul still cast a sleep spell on him just in case. He handed the barely breathing old man to little Algie, who wrapped him up and carried him away from Kismet as discreetly as possible. Seeing that Kismet simply stood there smiling without making a move, Saul felt a little relieved. It was the same as back at the Ralph estate. Kismet, despite being a second-ranked true wizard, had held back and even allowed Saul to injure him. "Why do you call me master?" Saul asked flatly, not eager to provoke him but keen to understand his motives. This was the Wizard Tower's territory, and Kismet had caused such a huge commotion in Grind Sale Town. Someone was bound to notice. More importantly, after Penny used her life to open a way out for Saul, the veil concealing Grind Sale Town had been shattered. Even though Saul had already fled far enough to no longer see the town, he could still feel the overwhelming stench of blood in the air. Kismet stood slowly, still smiling, because you were chosen by the diary, and the diary's master is my master. This guy. Saul didn't know why, but the moment he heard Kismet mention the diary, he felt an inexplicable sense of confirmation. So he did know about the diary. That meant his appearance at the Ralph estate wasn't a coincidence. He was very likely after the diary as well. But Saul had no intention of admitting he had it. Who knew what this guy, with his twisted mind, his flair for melodrama and his flair for theatrical artistry, was really after? Was he truly looking for a master, or was he planning to replace one? "If I'm your master," Saul asked expressionlessly, "then will you follow my orders?" If this guy dared to say yes, Saul was absolutely going to make him cross-dress on the spot. But Kismet just held his harp, looking regretful. "I'm terribly sorry, master. I still have a very important mission to fulfill. I cannot remain at your side for now, but once the time is right, I will stay with you forever." Chapter 277, Gaining the Past. "It seems I'm not living up to the title of master, huh?" Saul had been keeping an eye on the diary, always pausing before he spoke. But no matter what words flashed through his mind, the diary didn't try to stop him. That, without a doubt, gave Saul more confidence. "Can I ask you a few questions?" "Of course you can, but we might not have much time, master, so please choose the questions you most want answers to. As long as I'm allowed to speak on it, I promise I won't lie to you." "So the things you can lie about are the ones you're not allowed to talk about?" Saul sneered inwardly, though his expression stayed neutral. He asked, "Penny, everything you did in Grind Sale Town, was it all to catch that nightmare butterfly that took the form of a girl?" Nightmare butterflies, curious creatures that exist between reality and illusion. They can traverse dreams and the waking world and even alter a person's perception of reality. Controlling one of them would be quite an enticing prospect, even for a true wizard. Kismet's tone shifted slightly. "However, I wasn't after her to tame her. What made the nightmare butterfly truly special wasn't just her ability to shift between realities, but her power to see through the past." "See through the past," Saul murmured. "Yes, without the power to know someone's past, how could you possibly reshape their perception of themselves?" He thought of Ada, whose identity still remained a mystery, and of the father and son pair in the nightmare butterfly tale he once read. A chill slowly crept into Saul's chest. "There's no need to worry, master. As long as you have the diary with you, the nightmare butterfly won't be able to break through your past." "Is the nightmare butterfly dead now?" Kismet rested his chin on one hand. So that's how she described herself. It seems my choice of words led to a bit of a misunderstanding, master." "She's not human. Nightmare butterflies have no humanity. Don't let her appearance or demeanor fool you." "Fool me?" Saul's face turned cold. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." Kismet smiled warmly, like an elder pleased with the maturity of a younger generation. Saul instinctively rubbed his arm, uncomfortable. "What did you mean by saying I gained the past?" Kismet looked off into the distance, toward the direction of Grind Sale Town. "Originally, I intended to use the fates of many lives there to bind the nightmare butterfly, and then personally eliminate her to take her supernatural power, seeing through the past. But—" he glanced at Saul, eyes burning with barely concealed fervor. "But then, you arrived in town at precisely the right moment." He brought his hands together and smiled, muscles twitching uncontrollably. "Not too early, not too late. Too early and I wouldn't have arrived yet. The Blood Town might have harmed you. Too late and I'd have already triggered the curse. You might never have encountered the nightmare butterfly. This is. Kismet's entire body trembled slightly, his face slowly twisting with excitement. This is destiny. Compared to Kismet's fervor, Saul remained composed. He merely glanced at his diary out of the corner of his eye and thought, so that warning from the diary back then, it was because the real mastermind hadn't arrived yet. Could it be that this Kismet fellow really would have protected me? But Saul quickly caught himself. Stay sharp, Saul. Even a butcher keeps his piglet healthy until it's fat enough. That's a pretty grim way to describe myself. Perhaps Saul's calm demeanor helped settle Kismet as well. The man's excitement gradually subsided. Forgive me for my outburst, master. He plucked his harp strings lightly. The soft melody seemed to help him regain composure. In any case, because you were present, a part of the nightmare butterfly's power was imprinted on you when she perished. So now, you possess a fraction of the ability to see into the past. His words instantly made Saul recall the searing pain in his eyes when he left Grindsail Town. Looking back, that might have been the result of Penny's residual supernatural influence. Saul cautiously directed his mental energy to his eyes, and instantly felt a cool sensation trickling outward from his pupils. It seemed something really had changed about his vision. Can I use it to observe Kismet? The diary gave no warning of danger, and Saul's curiosity grew. But just as he lifted his head to look at Kismet, he realized the man had vanished. Master, don't waste it on me, Tilda, Kismet's voice echoed from behind. You only inherited part of the power to see into the past. There are limits to who and how often you can use it. Then why did you dodge it? Saul smirked faintly, but his smile quickly faded. That sudden movement, did he just appear behind me? Could that be spatial magic? If you must use this ability, Master, Kismet continued, use it on something or someone close to you, something truly valuable. Saul had no family in this world. He was all alone. At the Wizard Tower he'd made 2 friends, but even then they all kept a respectful distance. No one pried into anyone else's secrets or past. The diary. Saul suddenly thought of the hardcover book that had accompanied him ever since he arrived in this world. Was Kismet hinting that I should use the ability on the diary? Could I really see its past with this power? His fingers slowly curled into a fist. This Kismet, he really seemed to know a lot about the diary. Who exactly is he? Recalling all the previous encounters involving Kismet, Saul refocused his mental energy and turned to face him again. Those golden pages, were both of them from you? Kismet paused. Is that what you call them? Golden pages, quite the accurate description. His expression looked a little conflicted for a moment before his smile returned. Yes, one of them I unintentionally formed at the Ralph Manor. I thought it was a lucky fluke, but in hindsight it may have been the result of our connection. Unfortunately, I didn't get to reveal myself before you returned to the Wizard Tower. I had one more page in my possession and entrusted it to someone else to deliver to you. And you weren't afraid it'd get lost along the way? Of course not. The golden pages will always find their way to their destined master. If the golden pages truly were part of the diary, then they had to be incredibly important. But the method for creating them. Does each golden page require hundreds of lives to be consumed? Kismet's lips tightened. Regrettably, just the loss of life isn't enough to generate a golden page. Otherwise, I'd rather stir up war across the continent than play games in a backwater town. Take the one formed at Ralph Manor, for instance. Its origins trace back nearly a century to the Blood Rose family, once one of the most prominent houses in the Kemma Empire. A family of such high standing naturally reaped plenty of lives. What's more, most of their finest descendants perished in the war at Hanging Hand Valley. And yet, even after all that, it wasn't until decades later in Ralph Manor that the golden page finally formed. Simple death isn't enough. Kismet chuckled softly to himself. There are many other factors involved in the formation of a golden page. Fate is funny like that. It likes to sprinkle salt on wounds and smack you across the face just when you start to feel joy. Just like right now. He suddenly looked up and gazed into the distance. Saul followed his gaze and saw a small black speck on the horizon. The speck rapidly grew larger. It was a massive bird, and it was descending toward the direction of Grindsail town. The current Grand Duke of the Kema Duchy, second-rank true wizard Kira, had arrived. Chapter 278. Of course not. The happy moments are always short-lived. It seems our time together is almost up, Master. He's leaving. Saul quickly took a half-step forward. Do you have more golden pages? I do, Master, but due to the unique nature of golden pages, I can't carry them all with me. Most are kept on other continents. As for the Western continent, there's only one left, and it's currently in the wasteland. When you one day arrive there, Master, I'll naturally return it to you. So there's another golden page in the wasteland. No wonder Kismet had once invited him to go there in that letter. Even though he still had no idea what these pages were truly for, Saul had a strong intuition. The more, the better. But judging from Kismet's words, this one wouldn't be delivered to him like the last. It had to be retrieved in person. What exactly are golden pages for? You must know, right? Of course I know, but please understand, this isn't something I can tell you just yet, Kismet said with a smile. Having a question go unanswered was frustrating, but Saul remembered clearly. Kismet had warned him from the beginning that there would be things he couldn't explain. After a moment of thought, Saul changed tactics and asked a more important question. Kismet, I have one last question. Please go ahead, Master. To become the owner of the dead wizard's diary, is it true that you need to have no blood relatives or friends in this world, and that you must not have killed the diary's previous owner yourself? That was something Saul had learned from Ralph, but he'd never had a way to verify it. Kismet froze for a moment, then smiled meaningfully, smugly even. Of course not. Saul's eyes narrowed. With one light-hearted remark, Kismet had denied decades of Ralph's research. Ralph had slaughtered his kin, plotted against his grandson, and faced off with Gorsa, all for nothing. It was all a colossal joke. At the same time, Saul became more cautious. If Kismet knew the real method of becoming the diary's owner, then everything he'd done up to this point, was it all part of a plan to seize the diary? As if sensing Saul's wariness, Kismet took the initiative to explain, Rest assured, Master, I would never use the diary, nor could I ever become its true owner. But how much truth could there be in the words of a habitual liar? So you can't tell me the real way either, can you? You really are clever, Master, Kismet said, bowing slightly with a hand over his chest. But I can tell you this, the fake method, the one everyone believes, was a rumor I planted myself. What? Saul said in disbelief. You did it to get people killed. Oh, I wouldn't dirty my own hands so casually, Master. Kismet wiggled his long fingers in front of him. These hands have far more important uses. Saul's expression grew complicated, and Kismet seemed momentarily confused by it. But he went on, grinning proudly. I buried that false information deep in the web of rumors. Whoever discovered it would believe it was the hard-won fruit of their desperate search, and they'd trust it wholeheartedly. He licked his lips. Impressive, right, Master? Just a few whispers, and they'd cling to scraps of truth, maybe just the diary's name, and from that, countless brilliant wizards would throw themselves toward death in hopes of seizing it. Isn't that a beautiful scheme? He rested his chin in one hand. Actually, the golden page that emerged in Ralph's manner wasn't something I'd anticipated. At first, I was confused. After all, I leaked the information to a genius of the Bloodrose family. Who would have thought the place where the Golden Page would be born was a lowly offshoot clan, the Bloodthorn family? Looking back now, I finally understand. It was all because one day you would come to Ralph's manor and take that newly formed page. So the destruction of the Bloodthorn family was you doing as well. Did Kismet know the diary itself had originated from the Bloodthorn family, or did he just not care? The Bloodthorn wasn't my original target. They were too small back then. My sights were set on the Bloodrose family, but the genius of that family had a ruthless heart. After discovering the clue I left behind, he slaughtered the entire Bloodrose family to meet the false requirements, even colluding with powers in the wasteland and dooming the Kema Empire's northern campaign. But then again, if he hadn't done that, he never would have been able to kill all his close kin. His only misstep was that he was assassinated in the end, causing the clues tied to the diary to fall into the hands of the Bloodthorn family instead. Everything Kismet said lined up with what Saul already knew. And that terrified him. So many people had killed every last family member they had just to obtain the diary. But what was even more chilling was Kismet himself. Just one lie from him, and who knows how many lives had been wiped out, all to forge golden pages. Still, wasn't the Battle of Hanging Hand Valley in the Western Continent over 70 or 80 years ago? This was Kismet's first time using the diary's rumors to kill. Just how old was this man, and what exactly was his goal in creating these pages? Unfortunately, those were things Kismet would never tell him. The conversation came to a brief pause. Saul was deep in thought, while Kismet simply smiled at him. Just then the giant bird reappeared in the sky, this time flying directly toward them. "It seems you have no further questions for now, Master. Then let me leave you with one final piece of advice. Since the diary is in your hands, you'll inevitably face more death. This is the danger and opportunity brought by fate. And you're part of that fate too, aren't you?" "Indeed, Master," Kismet said calmly. "And if you die during some crisis, that would simply mean you weren't the diary's true master. I'll just wait for the next one." In the sky, the great bird let out a long cry. It had noticed Saul and was issuing a warning. Kira was about to land. But neither Saul nor Kismet reacted to the bird overhead. "That I actually believe," Saul muttered darkly. Of course Kismet could see Saul's irritation, but he didn't mind in the least. "Master, the more you interact with the diary and the more pages you use, the deeper your connection with it will grow. Only then will you truly become its master. I sincerely look forward to that day." "If that's your goal, you really didn't need to go through so much trouble to stir up chaos for me," Saul replied. "At the very least, I've already used quite a few of the white pages." That caught Kismet off guard. He tilted his head, uncertain. "Master, have you really used that many white pages? I don't mean to doubt you, it's just that I'm worried we might have different understandings of what that means." He leaned forward slightly, testing the waters. "Have you used 10 pages, perhaps?" Saul glanced at the diary on his left shoulder and cleared his throat. "I think it's close to 100, actually. By the way, is there a limit to the number of white pages you can use? If so, I'll start packing myself." Kismet froze. It was the first time Saul had ever seen him lose control of his expression. And he had to admit, it felt really satisfying. Chapter 279, This is Death. "There's no upper limit," Kismet murmured as if sleepwalking. "That's not a real page." "Is that so?" Saul smiled. "That's great. I wasn't sure before, so I've been using it very cautiously." Kismet stared blankly at Saul, muttering unconsciously, "Wizard towers, are they really this dangerous?" Before Saul could respond, Kismet suddenly kicked off the ground and leapt 3 meters backward. Boom! The next second, a silver wide-bladed greatsword stabbed into the ground right where he had been, nearly grazing his nose. "You again, you silver-haired bastard. If you've got the guts, stop running and fight me fair and square." Following the shout came the dashing figure of Kira, looking every bit the valiant warrior, completely unfitting her unladylike words. Kismet hugged his harp, smiling as he looked at the war goddess Kira, who had planted herself squarely between him and Saul. "Fighting is so uncivilized. How about this, Miss Kira? Why don't I play you a tune instead?" His only answer was Kira yanking the greatsword out of the ground and slashing toward him once more in a bold arc. But just as the sword fell, Kismet suddenly leapt back again. Kira didn't miss a beat. Her blade, though slicing through empty air, spun around smoothly as she launched a second strike. Yet Kismet never struck back. He simply kept retreating. The chase continued, her attacking, him fleeing, until their silhouettes nearly disappeared over the horizon far beyond Saul's line of sight. Then, in the distance, a massive burst of light suddenly exploded, forcing Saul to turn his head and shut his eyes. Even then, the brilliance left his vision spinning, the flash burning into his eyes until they went black for a moment. "A powerful light-based spell, though it doesn't seem particularly offensive," Saul muttered as he recovered. When he looked again, both Kismet and Kira were nowhere to be seen. Who knew where their fight had taken them? Just like that, things had once again drifted away from him. Saul turned his head, looking at the old madman still lying unconscious in the distance. He sighed. No matter what happened next, it seemed the old man would never return to normal. Maybe, in his memories, his little sister was still clinging to his back, and they were still fleeing far away together. Saul raised his hand and summoned Mage Hand. The spectral palm turned upward, gently lifting the unconscious old man off the ground. And so across the desert 2 figures, one upright, one horizontal, made their way toward the blood-red grind sail town. As he walked, Saul turned toward the dead wizard's diary. With just a glance, the diary flew from his left shoulder to hover before him. Ever since building the mental realm, the diary had been much more obedient. Now that it was just him and an ordinary person nearby, he recalled his conversation with Kismet, a spark of curiosity rising in his heart. Interact with the past. If I understood correctly, Kismet was suggesting I use Observe the Past on the diary. That would affect my connection to it. The diary didn't reject the thought. That only boosted Saul's confidence. Though Kismet's true motives remained unclear, Saul believed most of what he'd said was trustworthy. Especially regarding the diary. If Saul could glimpse into its past, wouldn't that mean he could uncover more of its secrets and deepen their bond? Saul raised his left hand, and a silver light began to form in his palm, slowly solidifying into a silver mirror. He looked into the mirror but saw no change in his eyes. However, when he circulated his mental energy through them, a chill flowed from his pupils, and a glimmer of silver light appeared in his gaze. Unlike Penny's eyes, which sparkled like a galaxy, the light in Saul's dark pupils resembled a lone Polaris in the night sky, just a single point, but strikingly clear. Having made up his mind, Saul didn't hesitate. He turned to look at the diary. But the moment his gaze landed on it, boom! It was like something exploded inside his skull. A searing, splitting pain shot through his head, so intense that his knees buckled and he nearly collapsed. Yet the moment he gave in and tried to stop channeling his mental power, the pain vanished instantly. And then, the world around him began to flicker rapidly between light and darkness. The climate shifted with dizzying speed. Time surged forward, then reversed. Grass sprouted in the desert, followed by springs of water, then a flourishing forest. The forest withered and died, water levels sank, and the land once again turned to arid wasteland. As Saul grew lost in the endless cycle of time, the world shifted once more. Suddenly, he wasn't himself anymore. He had no idea what he'd become, only that his perspective, his form, had completely changed. Yet in front of him was still the dead wizard's diary. Only now it was far, far closer. So close it felt like being a nearsighted person without glasses. He had to be within 10 centimeters to see the text clearly. Then a beautiful silver feathered quill suddenly drifted down next to his face, loosely held in a hand. As the fingers pressed down, the quill's tip touched the diary and began writing line after line. Saul didn't recognize a single word. But the moment the first character was written, the world before the diary began to change. It started with birds nesting in the forest, suddenly tumbling from branches to the ground. Then a young deer strolling through the woods suddenly buckled at the knees, collapsed, and lay still, eyes wide, staring vacantly at the air. Another line was written. A lively town fell silent in an instant. People on the streets, in their homes, working in shops, all dropped to the floor. Their eyes were still open, locked on wherever they'd been looking when they fell, their expressions frozen in time. Whether they had been smiling, grieving, or indifferent, now every face looked like a death portrait. The quill didn't stop. The vision shifted again, mountains collapsed, floods surged. The land scorched, then froze, continents cracked, corpses littered the ground. The diary in Saul's vision suddenly soared into the sky. He saw the world fall into stillness. All life, all things, even the inanimate, all faded into silence. Light slowly disappeared. Even darkness no longer existed. Saul was completely captivated, unable to look away. He asked without thinking, "What is this?" And then a flat, emotionless voice echoed from within his body. "This is death." Saul shuddered violently and collapsed. Thud, thud. The first sound was him hitting the ground hard, utterly unprepared. Fortunately, his magically enhanced body was tough enough that he didn't get hurt. The second was the old madman falling. Saul had lost focus, his mage hand vanishing, and the unconscious man dropped like a sack. Saul still hadn't fully recovered. He simply rolled onto his side and found a comfortable position to lie in for a bit longer. The madman, he figured, was used to sleeping on the ground anyway. I just witnessed the death of an entire world. Was that the past diary record? But then he recalled, the quill wrote first, and only then did death follow. A chill crept into his heart. Could it be that the diary caused the death of that world? Could the diary really be that powerful? If it had such a terrifying ability, how could its master have only reached 4th rank? Wait, that info came from Ralph, and Ralph probably got misled by Kismet. What level of existence is this diary, and why did it choose me to be its master? As the thought struck him, Saul instinctively looked toward his left shoulder. Instantly, he shot up with a gasp, panic finally breaking through on his face. Where's my diary? Chapter 280, 3rd rank. My diary, where's my diary? That huge, bright red hardcover book. Saul felt a cold sweat break out across his entire body in an instant. A numbing stiffness shot from the soles of his feet straight up to the back of his skull. Calm down. Saul took a deep breath, forcing his racing heart and rapid breathing to settle. He shut his eyes and focused, trying to sense the diary's presence. It wasn't difficult. In fact, the moment Saul calmed down, he saw the diary clearly within his own soul body. The red hardcover book was floating quietly within his soul body. The instant Saul laid eyes on it, it lazily flipped over once. Have I already turned the diary into my locator? In truth, Saul had already understood what had happened the moment he saw the diary within his soul body. He had just been too overwhelmed to be sure. A first-rank apprentice, once their magic and mental power meet the standard, can ascend to 2nd rank by constructing a complete first-tier spell. But to rise to 3rd rank, a 2nd-rank apprentice must choose a locator, something they accept both physically and spiritually. Only then, when their magic also reaches the standard, can they ascend. Saul had already met the magic requirement long ago, after absorbing large amounts of souls. His magical aptitude had also seen significant improvement through repeated magical body modifications, not to mention his mental strength, which now rivaled that of a true wizard. Now he had stabilized his locator and could begin studying the more profound second-tier spells. Once he successfully solidified his first second-tier spell, that would mean he had officially become a third-rank wizard apprentice. The higher the tier of spell, the more dangerous the knowledge it contains, sometimes even carrying the risk of mental contamination. Only by choosing and stabilizing a locator can one safely approach this higher-tier knowledge. Otherwise, all that awaits the reckless is destruction. Ever since the diary moved from Saul's left shoulder into his soul body, it had brought him a powerful sense of stability. When Saul meditated, cast spells, or manipulated magic energy, he could feel the shockwaves of magic and mental energy drastically reduced. This way, the mental backlash from casting first-tier spells is almost negligible, and zero-tier spells no longer affect my mind at all. Even though I haven't learned any second-tier spells yet, I'm already stronger than most second-rank apprentices. And once I do learn them, my offensive and defensive capabilities will both rise to a whole new level. Among all the third-rank apprentices I know, I'll be among the top. Plus, if I launch a soul-based attack, even a true wizard might fall if caught off guard. He closed his eyes again, calming his emotions. Afterward, Saul went through the familiar spells he had mastered, one by one, confirming that the fluctuations in his mental energy were even smaller than those of an average third-rank apprentice. In the past I glimpsed, the diary's power far exceeded what it is now. Right now, it seems many of its abilities are sealed. But that's fine. This gradual unsealing is what suits me best. Otherwise, the diary itself would be the greatest danger to me. That world of death I saw might represent the diary's peak power, but strength like that, even if I obtained it, it would be near impossible to control. Saul knew himself well. He didn't envy the power to destroy worlds. He only wanted to walk steadily down the path beneath his feet. After resting a few minutes and clearing his mind, Saul stood up and cast Mage Hand again, lifting the old madman off the ground once more. At the same time, he pulled out a pen and paper from his pocket, planning to use the journey back to continue his research into magic. His conversation with Kismet had not only deepened his understanding of the diary, but also intensified his desire for strength. Though Kismet called him master, he had shown no mercy in his actions. According to him, in order to strengthen Saul's bond with the diary, he didn't mind pushing Saul into danger with his own hands. Even if the diary allowed Saul to foresee fatal crises, the only thing that could truly overcome and avoid those crises was Saul's own strength. The sky had finally cleared. The blood-colored night was over. On his way back, Saul didn't encounter Kira again. That war goddess clearly enjoyed fighting more than anything else. Who knew if she managed to catch up to Kismet? But just as Saul approached the outskirts of Grindsail town, he ran into people from the Kema Duchy. They had surrounded the entire town but hadn't entered it. Each stood at least 100 meters from its border. Several soldiers held special longbows, their arrows already ablaze. The flaming arrows loosed with a twang, landing precisely in the town and igniting roaring fires. There was magic involved in these flames as well. A few people dressed like wizards were arguing nearby, holding crystal balls and astrolabes, seemingly trying to verify something. Not far behind these wizards was a carriage. The coachman with the little mushroom hat was squatting pitifully by the side, holding a ceramic pot in his arms. The first to notice Saul approaching was one of the wizards. He eyed Saul warily. But before the wizard could say anything, the coachman suddenly leapt up. "Master," the coachman beamed, flashing a set of impressively neat teeth. The moment he called out, all those arguing wizards instantly changed their expressions. Smiles bloomed across their faces as they gave Saul the most heartfelt welcome they could muster. Saul had no interest in exchanging pleasantries with the Kema Duchy's wizards. From the look of it, most of them were only second-rank apprentices. Only the one leading them had third-rank strength. He nodded at them politely, then walked straight to the coachman. The coachman gazed at Saul with obvious excitement. "Master, you really made it out safely." "They said everyone who went into the town died, but I never believed you'd be one of them." The mushroom on his head wobbled. The mushroom in his ceramic pot wobbled at the same rhythm. "You waited out here the whole time?" Saul asked with a smile. "Yes, master. When more people arrived later, I hid in the forest and pretended to be a mushroom. They completely ignored me." Saul chuckled, thinking that was probably when Billy and Angela arrived. Their attention was all on the town, so they didn't notice the coachman hiding in the woods. Or maybe they did see him but just didn't care. "Did you see a male wizard leave the town?" Saul wanted to know if Billy had made it out alive. The coachman shook his head. "I stayed hidden and didn't dare look closely, but someone did leave through the forest later, a wizard, I think. I can't say for sure if he came from the town. After that, the Kema Duchy people arrived. They found me and even brought me a maid." "A maid from the Kema Duchy?" Saul frowned slightly. "What kind of maid?" "She's in the carriage." As if on cue, the carriage door suddenly swung open. Saul turned his head to look, and saw a maid doll dressed in a black and white uniform sitting primly inside, winking at him flirtatiously. "Aren't you Wright's maid doll?" There was no one else in the carriage, so Saul immediately glanced around, searching for Wright. "No need to look. Wright entered the town. He's probably dead by now." That voice. Lady Eura. Saul snapped his head around so fast he nearly wrenched his neck. The smile vanished instantly from the doll's face. "I'm not Eura, I'm Vinny. Don't call me Eura." She turned her head away from him. The carriage door slammed shut with a thud. Saul stood there, stunned, and looked to the coachman, who was wearing the exact same bewildered expression. Several of the Kema Duchy's wizards had been discreetly watching this whole time. Seeing Saul's confusion, one of them awkwardly stepped forward. "Greetings. I'm Barry, court wizard of the Kema Duchy and a third-rank apprentice. I apologize if our duke's treatment of the lady in the carriage was disrespectful. We hope you won't take offense." Only then did Saul realize the truth. Although the tower master had always called her Eura, the doll had named herself Vinny, a name completely unrelated to Eura. Come to think of it, perhaps the only one who truly acknowledged her as Eura was Gorsa. So who was Eura really, and how had she been created? That might be something only the master of the wizard tower could answer.